There is a show that has been on television since before most of the people watching this were born. It started in December of 1989, and it has never stopped. 36 seasons, nearly 800 episodes, the longest-running animated series in American history. A show so embedded in the culture that its characters are more recognizable to most people than the faces of real historical figures. You know the theme music. You probably heard it in your head just now. You know the couch gag. You know the way Homer says that one word when something goes wrong. The single syllable that has become so universal a shorthand for a variety of frustration that people who have never watched the show use it without knowing where it came from. You know Springfield the way you know your own neighborhood, even if you have never been there, even though it does not exist on any map. And yet, the deeper you look at this show, the stranger it becomes. There are layers under the jokes. There are questions buried under the punchlines. There are mysteries written into the fabric of Springfield that the show has never answered, and in some cases has never even acknowledged, that become visible only when you stop watching and start looking. The Simpsons Iceberg is one of the most sprawling in all of popular culture, not because the show is more mysterious than others, but because it has been running long enough that the accumulation of detail, the weight of 36 years of episodes and callbacks and contradictions and theories and revelations, has created something that goes far deeper than any single viewing can account for. This is not a video about the show getting bad. It is not a video about the golden era versus the decline. It is about what the show has always been, at every level of its depth, the surface and the dark water below it. So get comfortable, let the lights go low, turn the brightness down if you want, and let us go down slowly, one layer at a time, through everything Springfield has been trying to tell us for 36 years. Section 1. The surface level. What everyone knows, every iceberg has a surface. A place where things are still familiar, still recognizable, still close enough to the world you know that nothing feels threatening yet. The water here is warm, and the light reaches the bottom, and you can see everything clearly. For The Simpsons, that surface is the version of the show most people carry around in their heads. A cartoon family in a cartoon town. A lazy, lovable father. A patient, devoted mother. A troublemaker son, a gifted daughter, a silent baby. A grumpy billionaire employer who can never remember his employee's name. A best friend at a bar that always seems to have a stool waiting. A neighbor with a very tall fence and an unshakable faith in something Homer cannot be bothered to understand. That is the postcard version of Springfield. The version that shows up on merchandise and in Halloween costumes and in the cultural vocabulary of people who have not watched a new episode since the Clinton administration. But even at the surface level, even before you start pulling at threads or digging into theories, The Simpsons is a more complicated show than it looks. It has always been more complicated than it looks. The comedy is the outermost layer of something considerably more layered, and the first sign of that layering is hiding in the most basic question you could ask about the show. Who are these people, really? Start with Homer. On the surface, Homer Simpson is a joke. He is the bumbling dad, the guy who makes every wrong decision, the walking punchline with the permanent 5 o'clock shadow, and the glazed expression, and the almost supernatural inability to learn from his mistakes. That is the caricature. The version that gets imitated at parties and quoted in memes and used as cultural shorthand for a specific variety of lovable incompetence. But underneath that caricature is something the show spent its early seasons building, with real care and genuine emotional intelligence. Homer Simpson is a man who wanted more than he got, not in a bitter way, not in a resentful way, but in the quiet, exhausted way of someone who made peace with the gap between who they thought they would be and who they actually became. He was a teenager who fell in love and made a choice. He took a job he had not planned on, at a plant he would never have chosen, to support a family he loves with everything he has. The job is beneath him in terms of what Homer might have been capable of in a different life. One where the circumstances had been slightly more generous, one where the environment had not been working against his cognitive development from the moment he was born. He wanted to be a musician once. That storyline has appeared in multiple forms across the show's run. The young Homer picking up a guitar, finding something in it that nothing else in his life provided. He wanted to travel. He wanted, in some vague and unformed way, that he was never quite equipped to articulate, to matter in a world bigger than Sector 7G. And instead he got Sector 7G, a safety inspector position at a nuclear facility, which sounds important until you realize the facility has had 342 documented safety violations, and counting. The safety inspector's primary demonstrated skill is falling asleep in close proximity to an active reactor core while eating a jelly donut. Homer's tragedy at the surface level is that he knows, somewhere underneath the donuts and the shouting and the spectacular carelessness, that his life did not turn out the way he once dreamed. The show does not dwell on this. It never lets the weight sit too long in any one scene, but it is there. It shows up in the episodes where Homer is briefly given a glimpse of a different life, a different version of himself, and you see how easily he steps into the alternate self, how naturally he inhabits the person he was not allowed to become, and then how painfully, how completely he always has to let it go. Then there is Marge. Marge Simpson is one of the most underestimated characters in the history of television comedy, and she has been consistently underestimated both by the audience and by the show itself at various points in its run. Marge is the spine of the Simpson family, not the flashy, loud, quotable spine that makes it onto the highlight reels. The actual structural spine, the load-bearing element. The thing that if you removed it, the entire structure would collapse within approximately 72 hours. She is the person who keeps Homer from drifting so far into his own chaos that he loses everything. She is the person who keeps the household functioning despite the near-constant disasters that orbit Homer, the way moons orbit a particular volatile planet. She is the person who shows up every time without being formally asked, without being adequately thanked, and handles whatever needs to be handled so that the family remains a family rather than a collection of people who happen to share a building. At the surface level, this reads as patience, deep, exhaustible, almost superhuman patience. But the show has always hinted, in its quieter moments, that Margie's patience has a cost. That somewhere underneath the blue tower of hair, and the steady warm voice, and the willingness to give Homer one more chance after one more chance, there is a person with her own interior weather, her own ambitions and frustrations, and perfectly valid anger at the life she sometimes got stuck with when she was too young to fully understand what she was choosing. The show explored this more honestly in its early seasons than in its later ones. The Marge-centered episodes of the show's first decade are some of the most emotionally complex pieces of writing the series produced because they treated her as a full human being with an interior life that existed independently of her function as Homer's wife and the children's mother. She had ambitions. She had talent. She had a version of herself she occasionally got to meet, the Marge who could paint, who could act, who could build something on her own terms. And then she always had to come back. Now think about Bart. Bart at the surface level is pure undiluted id. He is the kid who does the thing every kid wishes they could do but does not. He writes on walls. He talks back to authority. He pranks, schemes, avoids homework with a creative investment that, applied to actual schoolwork, would have made him an honor student. He treats the rules of polite society as optional guidelines at best. But there is something that the show established in its earliest episodes and never quite abandoned, even when it got buried under seasons of increasingly cartoonish stories. Bart is sharp, not academically. His grades have always been a disaster. But Bart has a streetwise intelligence, a social intelligence, a kind of instinctive understanding of people and situations that serves him very well. In the spaces where formal education has nothing to offer, he reads rooms with accuracy. He understands power dynamics with immediacy. He knows exactly who he can push and how far, and where the line between authority that is bluster and authority that has actual teeth is located. For a 10-year-old, that is a remarkably sophisticated set of skills. The show knows it. The tragedy of Bart, if you want to call it that, is that the structure of his life offers him essentially no path to use that intelligence in any way the world would recognize as valuable. His gifts are the kind that do not fit into any box Springfield provides. So Bart puts them to work in the only arena where they are useful, making trouble in ways that nobody can quite predict or contain. Lisa, meanwhile, is almost the inverse of her brother in the most important sense. Where Bart's intelligence cannot find a home, Lisa's intelligence is visible to everyone, and nobody knows what to do with it. She is the smartest person in most rooms she walks into. She knows it. Everyone around her knows it. And in Springfield, this knowledge has been more burden than blessing. From the moment she was old enough to understand what intelligence was, the show has always been clear-eyed about this. Lisa is brilliant, and Springfield is not a place that knows what to do with brilliance. It celebrates mediocrity with an enthusiasm that brilliance can never generate. It rewards compliance. It has a deep cultural allergy to anyone who makes its residents feel less intelligent by comparison. And Lisa does that constantly, not through any desire to diminish anyone, but simply by being herself. The surface level of The Simpsons is already, if you look at it with attention, a portrait of a family navigating a persistent gap between who they are and what their world allows them to be. It is a comedy because the show keeps that gap at a safe, laughable distance most of the time. But the gap is always there, underneath the jokes, waiting, and Maggie. Even at the surface, Maggie is strange. She is a baby who has been a baby for 36 years. She communicates through pacifier sounds and pointed stares, and the occasional display of capabilities so far beyond her developmental stage that it should be alarming to everyone around her, and somehow never is. She saves the family from multiple catastrophes. She demonstrates problem-solving intelligence that would be remarkable in an adult. And she does all of it in a consistent, deliberate silence that the show has been presenting as a character trait since the very first episode. The surface-level reading of Maggie is that she is the cute one, the prop baby, the visual gag that gets passed around the family scenes for a sound effect and then put back in the corner. But even casual viewers have noticed something off about Maggie. The way her eyes sometimes suggest a calculation entirely incompatible with the developmental stage she is supposed to be in. The way she responds to situations with a situational awareness that infants simply do not have. The show keeps gifting her with moments of competence that, when added up over the years, paint a picture of someone very different from what the surface reading suggests. There is more on that later. Much more. And then there is Springfield itself. The surface-level Springfield is a small American city with a nuclear power plant, a lot of colorful residents, and an architectural landscape containing elements drawn from small towns and mid-sized cities and industrial suburbs across America, in a combination that makes the place feel simultaneously generic and highly specific. It is funny. It is recognizable. It feels like a place you might have grown up near, or at least driven through on a long trip when you were a child and the window of the car was going by at highway speed and you saw something out there, a cooling tower on the horizon, or a convenience store by an on-ramp, that looked exactly like that. But Springfield, even on the surface, has always been a little off. The kind of place where things that should not happen do happen, and everyone moves on. Where the news of a genuinely catastrophic event gets absorbed by the community in about 48 hours, and forgotten entirely by the following week. Where the same disasters repeat themselves without anyone learning anything substantial from them. Where the fish have extra eyes and nobody seems particularly concerned about it. That is the surface. Warm, funny, oddly nostalgic in the way that all great popular art eventually becomes nostalgic, because it carries with it the accumulated weight of everyone who has loved it. Now let us go just a little deeper. Drop a comment below with your location and the time you are watching from. And if you are settling in for the full journey, hit subscribe. There are a lot more layers below us. Section 2. The Yellow Skin Mystery. Let us start with something that is right there in front of you every single time you watch the show. Something so visually dominant, so omnipresent, so much the defining aesthetic signature of The Simpsons that most people have stopped seeing it entirely. They look at it without registering it. The way you stop hearing the refrigerator hum once you have lived with it long enough. Every single person who lives in Springfield is yellow, not slightly tinted. Not in a way that could be explained by unusual lighting choices or artistic stylization that just happens to read as an ambiguous skin tone. They are a vivid, flat, unambiguous yellow, the precise color of school buses and caution tape and the kind of industrial warning sign that means something dangerous is nearby and you should adjust your behavior accordingly. The standard explanation for this, the one the show's creators have offered on multiple occasions and the one most people accept without much further thought, is that it was a deliberate artistic choice made during the show's original production process. The story, as it has been told in various interviews and retrospectives, is that when the characters were being designed in the mid to late 1980s, the animators were thinking about what would make these characters immediately distinctive in the context of commercial television. Yellow skin against a normally colored background environment would stop the hand on the remote control. A viewer flipping through channels would pause on something that looked that unusual. The color would register before the content would, drawing in the passive browser and buying the show a few extra seconds to make its case. That explanation is probably accurate on a production level, but here is where things start to become interesting. Because the show itself, over the course of 36 years of storytelling, has quietly, consistently, and in some cases very specifically undermined that explanation in ways that are difficult to dismiss as coincidence. The show suggests, not always directly but with a persistent subtlety, that the yellow skin is not just a stylistic choice within the universe of the show. It suggests that the yellow skin is a characteristic specific to Springfield's residents, something that marks them as being from this particular place, from this particular contaminated environment, from this specific intersection of industrial negligence and human habitation. The evidence for this is in how the show handles its guest characters, and it has been there since the beginning. When celebrities appear in Springfield, which has happened hundreds of times across the show's run, they are almost never drawn yellow. They are rendered in more naturalistic skin tones, with proportions closer to human anatomy, with features that have a different quality from the show's regular cast. They look like visitors from outside. They look like people who came from somewhere that was not this particular valley, downwind of this particular leaking reactor. You could counter this by noting that it is simply the show's way of making real people recognizable. If you are drawing a caricature of a specific celebrity, you need the audience to identify them immediately, and making them yellow would interfere with that identification. That counter-argument has some validity, but the visual distinction is not limited to celebrity appearances. It extends to how the show draws characters who are established as coming from somewhere other than Springfield. Original characters, invented for the show, who are presented as being from another city, are often rendered with slightly different visual characteristics from the local population. The distinctions are sometimes subtle, but they are consistently present across the show's run in a way that feels designed rather than accidental. The show is telling you something in its visual language. It is telling you that there is a difference between people who live inside this town and people who exist outside of it. That the population of Springfield shares a visual characteristic that is not universal. That the yellow skin is theirs in a way that sets them apart from the broader human world the show occasionally depicts when it ventures beyond the town's limits. Now layer onto that a specific piece of canon that the show introduced in its second season and then spent 3 subsequent decades treating as either a background joke or a piece of charming iconography, without ever fully engaging with what it actually implied. Blinky. Blinky is a fish, a 3-eyed fish, specifically pulled from a river that runs near the nuclear power plant. His existence was briefly treated as a public scandal within the show's narrative. A gubernatorial candidate used Blinky as evidence that Mr. Burns was poisoning the environment and the water supply. Burns was forced to eat the fish on live television to demonstrate that it was harmless, which did not prove that it was harmless. It was designed to change the subject, shift the conversation from the fish's mutation to the question of whether it tasted acceptable. The town watched, shrugged, and moved on. Blinky became a symbol rather than a question. He became Springfield iconography. He got onto merchandise. He became a background element in the show's visual vocabulary. But the question that Blinky's existence raised was never answered, and it is impossible to avoid once you ask it plainly. If the fish have 3 eyes, what is happening to the people drinking the same water? The answer the radiation theory provides is yellow skin, 4 fingers on each hand, bulging eyes, a specific skull shape that does not appear in any population outside of Springfield, a tendency toward cognitive profiles that range from severely impaired at one end to extraordinarily enhanced at the other, with very little in the middle. An immune system that operates in ways that no normal immunological model can account for. These are not cartoon conventions. They are the show's answer to the question Blinky raised. If you accept that Blinky's 3 eyes are caused by the plant's contamination, and the show is unambiguous that they are, then the logical conclusion of that same contamination operating on a much larger scale, across the human population of the entire town over multiple generations, is everything that makes Springfield's residents look the way they look. The yellow skin is not a stylistic choice within the world of the show. It is the human version of Blinky's 3rd eye. And here is the detail that makes this reading feel less like a theory and more like the show's actual design intention. The yellow skin appears consistently in Springfield residents across all generations. It appears in the children and the adults and the elderly. It appears in people who were born in Springfield and have never left. It is consistently absent in people who come from outside. And the show draws that distinction with a visual consistency that spans 36 years. That is not an accident. Accidents in visual design do not persist across hundreds of episodes over 3.5 decades with that degree of consistency. That is a choice, made deliberately and maintained with purpose. Now let's consider a more specific implication. If the yellow skin is environmental, If it is the product of the town's contaminated water and air and food supply operating on human biology over extended periods, then it should have appeared gradually in Springfield's history. The town did not always have the nuclear plant. Before the plant was built, Springfield was simply a town, an ordinary, unremarkable American community with whatever the normal diversity of human appearance looks like. At some point after the plant was built, after the contamination began accumulating in the ecosystem, the biology of Springfield's residents began to change. The change would have been slow, generational, invisible to the people living through it, because any change that happens slowly enough becomes the new normal before anyone has time to compare it to the old one. By the time Springfield reached the present day of the show's timeline, the change was complete. Everyone was yellow. Everyone had been yellow their entire lives. Everyone around them was yellow. The yellow skin was simply a fact of existence, unremarkable, unremarked upon, as natural as the weight of the air. But here is the complication. The show has depicted Springfield's past in historical flashback episodes. It has shown founding mythology, origin stories, visions of what the town looked like before its current character was established. And in those historical sequences, the characters are drawn yellow too. Either the contamination goes back further than the nuclear plant, which opens a door into the question of what Springfield was built on, before Burns erected his facility. Or the show's visual consistency simply required applying the current aesthetic to historical depictions, regardless of historical plausibility. The second explanation is almost certainly what happened in a production sense. But within the logic of the radiation theory, the first explanation is more interesting. The possibility that Springfield's environmental contamination did not begin with Burns, that Burns built on something that was already there, that the land itself has a history of producing this effect in the organisms that live on it, and that Burns chose this particular location for his plant, precisely because he knew what the land already was. This is speculation, but the radiation theory has always been more than an explanation for why the Simpsons look the way they look. It is a framework for understanding why Springfield is the way it is, and why it has always been that way, and why it seems so resistant to being any other way. The yellow skin is the most visible piece of evidence for that framework, and it has been right there, in plain sight, on every frame of the show for 36 years. The show has been wearing its mystery on its face the entire time. Let us also consider what the yellow skin means for the show's emotional register. One of the things that makes The Simpsons work as a piece of visual storytelling is the expressiveness of its character design. The yellow skin is a significant part of that expressiveness. Against the relatively neutral yellow baseline, emotion reads clearly and immediately. The color changes in the face, the shapes of the expressions, the physical comedy of bodies and extremis, all of it is more visible, more immediately readable against the yellow than it would be against a more naturalistic skin tone. So, the production choice that may have had disturbing narrative implications also happened to be the right aesthetic choice for the kind of storytelling the show wanted to do. The yellow is not just a mystery. It is also, in a very practical sense, what makes Homer's face work. What makes Bart's grin land. What makes Marge's worry lines readable from across a room. The contamination, in this reading, gave Springfield its expressiveness. The mutation is also the art style. The thing that is wrong with the town is also the thing that makes the town beautiful. That is a very Springfield kind of irony. Section 3. Homer's many deaths and the superhuman body. One of the quietest mysteries in The Simpsons is also one of the most plainly visible because it happens so often and so consistently that most people stopped noticing it somewhere around the 5th season. It became part of the furniture of the show. Expected, unremarkable, just what happens. Homer Simpson should be dead, not once, not twice. By any reasonable accounting of the cumulative physical trauma the show has depicted him enduring over the course of 800 episodes, Homer Simpson should have died dozens of times over. He has been shot. He has been stabbed with several different instruments. He has been run over by cars, multiple different cars, in multiple different episodes, at varying speeds and from varying angles. He has fallen off cliffs and landed at the bottom in ways that should have made the landing definitive. He has been electrocuted on multiple occasions. Not the comedic cartoon variety where your hair stands up, and you wobble around, and then you are fine. In the next scene, but electrocution sequences the show frames with enough physical specificity that a basic understanding of what electricity does to biological tissues should make them lethal. He has been set on fire. He has been launched into the air from heights and velocities that should have turned the landing into something from a forensics report. He has been attacked by animals from household pets to exotic wildlife in ways that left visible, extensive damage. He has had objects of considerable mass dropped on various parts of his body from heights sufficient to cause catastrophic injury. He has survived explosions at ranges where the blast pressure alone should have been fatal. He has been frozen solid and thawed. Has been submerged underwater for periods exceeding what human breath-holding physiology can sustain. He once traveled to space in a shuttle, contributed to what could charitably be described as several near disasters during the mission, and walked away from it. The show plays all of this for laughs, which is correct, and nobody is suggesting that a primetime animated comedy should be governed by medical realism. Cartoon characters survive impossible things. That is part of the aesthetic contract of the form, and the audience accepts it. But The Simpsons is not in its emotional register a traditional cartoon. It is a show that has always prided itself on its engagement with genuine human experience. Its humor derives precisely from the gap between the animated form's unreality and its content's realistic grounding in the textures of actual life. And within that context, Homer's physical indestructibility is notable not just because it happens, but because of how the show sometimes frames it. There are sequences in the show's run where Homer's survival is played not as comedy, but with a documentary specificity that invites the viewer to actually think about it, and then he heals from it anyway, and the show moves on. The accumulation of this, over 800 episodes, becomes something that demands an explanation that cartoon convention alone does not fully provide. The most useful framework for understanding Homer's physical resilience is the radiation theory. If Springfield's environment has produced mutations in the biological systems of its residents, and the evidence for this is considerable, then what would those mutations look like in a human body that has been directly exposed to the plant's contamination at close range for multiple decades? The answer depends on what the mutation optimizes for. And Homer's mutation, the evidence suggests, optimizes for physical survival. His body has adapted to an environment that should have killed him gradually. It has developed capacities for damage absorption and repair that vastly exceed anything normal human biology can manage. His healing rate is not the cartoon variety where an injury is simply absent in the next scene. It is a specific biological process that the show has depicted in enough detail to suggest a design intent behind it. His tolerance for pain is not the result of willpower or training. It is physiological. His nerve endings communicate pain at a different threshold than they should. Is consistent with certain kinds of radiation-induced neurological modification. His immune system has developed a kind of aggressive overcapability that repairs damage in ways that sometimes approach regeneration. Homer can survive because he was built by an environment rather than by any intention to survive in the place he lives. The toxicity that damaged his cognitive function also, as a side effect of the same biological reorganization, made his body nearly indestructible. There is a specific episode that illuminates this more clearly than most, and it is usually discussed for different reasons. Homer, from season 12, is the episode where Homer discovers that a crayon has been lodged in his brain since childhood. When the crayon is removed, his IQ rises dramatically. He becomes intelligent, articulate, capable of perceiving and understanding his world in ways he never has before. And then he has the crayon put back in. This moment has been discussed extensively from the angle of what it says about Homer's emotional relationship to intelligence and to Springfield. But there is a physiological implication that is equally interesting. Homer's brain, over the course of having a foreign object embedded in its frontal lobe for his entire life, did not simply work around the obstruction in the way a normal brain would. It reorganized. It restructured. It developed an architecture that accommodated the presence of the crayon in ways that preserved as much function as possible despite the impediment. And when the crayon was removed, the brain reorganized again. Almost immediately. A brain that had spent 30-plus years in one configuration shifted to a dramatically different configuration within days. And then, when the crayon was replaced, the brain reversed its reorganization and returned to the previous configuration. A normal brain does not do this. A normal brain does not reorganize itself at speed in response to the insertion or removal of a foreign object. Homer's brain is doing something that the radiation theory would predict. It is adapting with an agility that goes beyond what standard human neurology can explain. The same adaptive capacity that allows his body to heal from physical trauma allows his brain to restructure in response to neurological disruption. He is, in biological terms, one of the most extraordinarily resilient organisms in Springfield. And Springfield, remember, is a place that has been applying significant environmental pressure to its residents for multiple generations. What survives that pressure is adapted. What is adapted to that pressure is resilient in specific and unusual ways. Homer Simpson survived Springfield. That is the simple version of the more complicated truth. Now let us address the four fingers, because it is directly relevant to the biological narrative and deserves more than the dismissal of cartoon convention. In standard animation, four fingers per hand is a simplification. It is easier to draw, easier to animate, and has been a standard feature of cartoon characters since the earliest days of the medium. This is true. But The Simpsons is a show that operates in a specific visual register, one that engages with the gap between cartoon form and realistic content. And within the show's universe, the four-finger detail is not visually isolated to its main characters in the way that purely stylistic conventions usually are. It is consistent across the entire Springfield population. Everyone who lives in Springfield has four fingers. Everyone who visits Springfield from elsewhere has a full complement of five. Polydactyly and oligodactyly, the presence of too many or too few fingers, are among the documented effects of specific kinds of chromosomal disruption. They are effects that can result from environmental exposures during prenatal development. Certain types of radiation exposure, particularly exposure during sensitive developmental windows, have been associated with limb abnormalities in the offspring of exposed individuals. If Springfield's water supply has been contaminated since before any of the current generation of residents was born, and the show's evidence suggests it has, then the developmental effects of that contamination would affect the children of exposed parents. Four fingers per person across the entire population over multiple generations. A shared developmental anomaly so universal within the community that it has become entirely unremarkable. Another detail that nobody questions because everyone looks the same, and looking the same as everyone around you is how normal feels. The four fingers are the quietest piece of evidence in the show's radiation narrative. They are the detail that is most obviously non-human, and that is most consistently treated as simply the way things are. They are Springfield's residents showing you, every time they reach for something on screen, that something happened to this population that did not happen to the broader human world. And nobody in Springfield notices. Because in Springfield, four fingers is what hands look like. Section 4. The Treehouse of Horror Canon Problem. There is a question that has existed at the edges of Simpsons fandom for as long as the show has aired its October specials, and it goes something like this. Are the Treehouse of Horror episodes real? It sounds like a simple question. The answer on the surface seems obvious. No, of course not. These are anthology horror specials. They're parodies of classic films and stories. Homer gets eaten by a lawnmower and is fine the next week. Bart and Lisa travel into the television and come home for dinner. Maggie has an alien for a father. These things are clearly not meant to be taken as part of the show's continuity. The writers have said as much. The framing device of the Halloween specials exists precisely to give the show permission to do things it cannot do in regular episodes. And yet, there is something about the Treehouse of Horror episodes that resists easy dismissal. Something that makes fans return to them, not just as fun seasonal detours, but as documents of something the show cannot quite say in normal space. The horror anthology format gives Springfield a different kind of permission. Not just permission to kill characters who will return, but permission to be honest about things the regular episodes are always softening. Let's start with the basics. The Treehouse of Horror specials began in Season 2 in 1990. The premiere special contained 3 segments: Bad Dream House, Hungry Are the Damned, and The Raven. From the beginning, the tone was deliberately unhinged. The Simpson family was menaced by a haunted house, abducted by aliens, and recited Edgar Allan Poe in a sequence that was genuinely eerie by children's television standards. The show had already established its voice by that point, but the Halloween special felt like something different. It felt like the show exhaling something it had been holding. Over the following decades, the Treehouse specials became one of the most anticipated events in television comedy. Some of them are brilliant. The Shining, a parody of Stanley Kubrick's The Shining, is frequently cited as one of the finest 10 minutes the show ever produced. Homer's brain and his desire to watch football and drink beer, while being cut off from both, the axe through the door, the frozen smile Bart gives as he watches his father freeze in the snow, it is somehow funnier and scarier than it has any right to be. Time and Punishment, in the same special, gives us Homer repeatedly accidentally destroying history with a toaster, and returning to find increasingly bizarre alternate Springfields. in a sequence that escalates beautifully before arriving at a Springfield where everything is perfect except it rains. Donuts, which Homer finds troubling for reasons he cannot articulate. Nightmare Cafeteria, the third segment, ends with a genuinely disturbing sequence in which the faculty of Springfield Elementary has been eating children, and the remaining students are pushed into a giant blender, and the episode simply ends there. No reversal, no comfort. Just Bart saying goodnight, and the credits rolling on something that felt, even in parody, like it meant something. The question of canon enters when you start to notice patterns. Consider Kang and Kodos, the two recurring alien characters who appear in virtually every Treehouse special. They are tentacled, drooling, cackling extraterrestrials from the planet Rigel 7, and they are the only characters who exist exclusively within the Treehouse universe. Except they aren't, quite. There are episodes of the regular show in which the aliens appear briefly in background gags. There is a Season 8 episode in which Homer is abducted and returns with a metal plate in his head. There is Hungry Are the Damned from the very first special, in which the Simpson family is abducted and Marge discovers a cookbook the aliens have written, which appears, upon closer inspection, to be a standard cookbook, and the word to serve is simply part of a different title. The aliens are not malevolent, just misunderstood. The Simpsons return home. Nothing changes. Except Kang and Kodos keep showing up, year after year, cackling, watching Springfield from their ship, occasionally participating in elections, occasionally disguising themselves as human politicians. There is a Treehouse episode in which they take over the bodies of both presidential candidates and reveal themselves on election night, and the crowd's response is to simply vote for one of them anyway, because they have no other option. This aired in 1996. It played as absurdist comedy. It plays differently now. The thing about Kang and Kodos is that they are always watching. Even in the specials where they don't appear directly, their spacecraft is sometimes visible in the background, hovering, just observing. The show never explains why. It doesn't have to. But the consistency of their presence across 30-plus years of Halloween specials creates the impression that something is watching Springfield from the outside. Something that finds human behavior simultaneously baffling and entertaining, something that has no intention of intervening, just observing. This connects to one of the deeper theories the fandom has developed about the Treehouse specials. The theory goes like this. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are not departures from Springfield's reality. They are glimpses of it. The magic reset button that restores everything to normal between episodes is not a storytelling convention. It is a property of Springfield itself. Springfield is a place where death is not permanent, where disaster leaves no lasting mark, where everything returns to a kind of baseline. The Treehouse specials, on this reading, are not special at all. They are just episodes in which the show acknowledges what is always true. Things happen in Springfield that would destroy any real place. They just don't leave scars. The segment called The Bart Zone, from Season 3's Treehouse special, adapts a famous Twilight Zone episode in which a boy with omnipotent psychic powers holds an entire community, hostage through terror. The community lives in constant fear, constantly telling the boy how wonderful he is, constantly pretending everything is fine. In the Simpsons version, it is Bart who holds Springfield in this way. The townspeople are frozen in permanent performance of happiness. Homer has been turned into a jack-in-the-box because he thought briefly negative thoughts. The segment is played for laughs, but there is something underneath it that is genuinely uncomfortable. Springfield already lives in a kind of enforced cheerfulness. The reset button is already a form of enforced forgetting. The Treehouse version is just more literal about it. Then there is the segment It's the Grand Pumpkin Millhouse, which aired in 2008, well into the show's later seasons, and which is a direct parody of the Peanuts Halloween special. In this segment, Millhouse genuinely believes in the Grand Pumpkin, a mythological figure who will rise from the pumpkin patch if a child's faith is pure enough. Lisa, who in regular episodes has become something of a moral center for the show, participates in this belief alongside him. The Grand Pumpkin does appear. It is immediately enraged that humans eat pumpkins. It finds this genocidal and begins killing people. The segment ends in carnage. What's interesting is not the horror but the faith. Millhouse believes. His belief is sincere. In the Peanuts original, Charlie Brown's sincerity is treated as innocence, as something worth protecting. In the Simpsons version, sincerity summons a monster. The show, perhaps without meaning to, says something about what it has become by 2008, about what it thinks about earnestness. The canonical status of Treehouse episodes matters because of what they contain. In Treehouse of Horror V, the segment The Shinning contains a sequence in which the ghosts of the Overlook Hotel, reimagined as a resort where Mr. Burns has brought the family as caretakers, seduce Homer with an endless bar and television. The sequence is hilarious. But the imagery of Homer in that sequence, his complete surrender to hedonism, his utter blankness when everything he wants is provided to him, mirrors something in the regular show. Homer's relationship with beer, donuts, and television has always been played as comic excess. But in the horror anthology space, stripped of the laugh track and the comedic pacing, it reads differently. It reads like addiction. It reads like a man who uses appetite to avoid feeling something he cannot name. Season 6's segment Nightmare on Evergreen Terrace puts groundskeeper Willie in the Freddy Krueger role, murdering children in their dreams because the adults of Springfield refused to help him when he was dying. The premise is played for horror comedy, but the specific mechanics of it are interesting. Willie can only kill children in dreams because children have not yet built the defenses adults have. Adults cannot be touched. In the regular show, Willie is a perpetually mistreated figure, overworked, underpaid, emotionally unacknowledged, existing at the margins of Springfield's social structure. The Treehouse version makes him a monster, but his motive is entirely sympathetic. He was failed by the community. The community that failed him is now safe. Only the children, the innocent inheritors of Springfield, are at risk. This pattern repeats across many of the most effective Treehouse segments. The horror tends to be generated by the same forces that generate quieter, subtler discomfort in the regular show: community indifference, appetite, the gap between how things look and how they are. The Treehouse specials are not departures from Springfield. They are translations of Springfield into a genre that makes its underlying dynamics visible. The deepest version of this theory holds that Treehouse of Horror is Springfield's unconscious. Every narrative has layers: the surface story it tells and the deeper thing it is processing through story. In Springfield's case, the regular episodes process things through comedy. Things that would be devastating in realism are made survivable through joke structure and reset. The Treehouse specials are what Springfield is actually thinking about when the comedy is stripped away. They're the dream version of the waking show. There is a meta-textual wrinkle here. The Treehouse specials have changed significantly over the years. The early ones, from seasons 2 through 8, are frequently cited as the best. More focused, more genuinely unsettling, funnier in the dark way that the show's best comedy always worked. The later specials, from the 2000s onward, became broader parodies, more reliant on pop culture references, less interested in the specific internal logic of Springfield. Fans read this as a decline in quality. Others read it as something thematically consistent. As Springfield has become more disconnected from itself over the years, its horror anthology has also become more disconnected from its own internal truth. The other canon question concerns characters who die in Treehouse episodes. Hundreds of characters have died in Halloween specials, including most of the main cast at various points. None of these deaths carry over, but there is a subtle accumulation across Treehouse episodes that functions like its own kind of continuity. The specials reference each other. Running jokes develop across specials that never appear in the regular show. Kang and Kodos have an entire relationship that plays out only in October. Willie has died in so many Treehouse episodes that the show eventually made the recurring nature of his death a joke. He dies every year, in different ways, and is fine the following October. The meta-awareness of his Treehouse mortality creates a character who exists in both worlds, simultaneously. The unkillable Willie of the regular show, and the perpetually sacrificed Willie of the horror specials. There is something almost mythological about this. In certain ancient narrative traditions, a figure who dies and is reborn cyclically is not simply a plot device. They are a symbol of something the community needs to process on a recurring basis. The thing they represent needs to be ritually killed and ritually restored. Willie, in the Treehouse universe, has become something like this. Every year he dies for Springfield's sins. Every year he is restored. The show doesn't know it is doing this, or maybe it does. The Treehouse of Horror episodes are, taken in sum, one of the most sustained works of dark comedy mythology in the history of American television. They have been running for over 30 years. They have touched every major theme the show has ever engaged. They have killed and resurrected every character. They have hosted aliens and ghosts and omnipotent children, and a version of Springfield where dolphins have taken over, and a version where the children are being eaten, and a version where Homer's back has developed a second head that is smarter than he is. And every year they end, and Springfield resets, and the show continues. Whether that reset is a narrative convenience or something the show is actually saying, something about memory, about grief, about the way communities survive by agreeing to forget, is the question the Treehouse Specials have been asking, in their oblique and terrifying and hilarious way, since 1990. Section 5. The Secret Lives of Springfield Side Characters. Springfield is not a background. It is a world. And what makes it feel like a world, what gives it its weight, its texture, the sense that something is always happening just off-screen, is its population. The side characters of The Simpsons are not furniture. They are people, fully realized, with histories and desires and interior lives that the show has only intermittently but genuinely explored. Over the course of more than 3 decades, the writers have dropped fragments of these lives into episodes. A line of dialogue here, a flashback there, a single image that recontextualizes everything. And the result is a cast of supporting characters who feel, in aggregate, more complex than they were ever intended to be. Take Barney Gumble. In the early seasons, Barney is Homer's perpetually drunk best friend. He is played broadly for comedic effect, belching, stumbling, nursing a beer through every scene, existing at the fringes of Springfield's social life, as a portrait of cheerful dissolution. He is in his early 30s, like Homer, and he has been drunk, essentially, since high school. There are glimpses, even in the early episodes, of the person Barney might have been. He mentions in passing that he was accepted to Harvard. He played football. In one episode, we see a flashback to a teenage Barney and Homer at a party, and it is Barney who was the sober, promising one. Homer was already drinking, and it was Homer who handed Barney his first beer, and it was that single gesture, that single moment of thoughtless peer pressure that redirected the entire trajectory of Barney's life. This backstory, revealed casually in Season 3, is one of the most quietly devastating things the show ever did. It reframes every Barney joke that came before and after. When Barney belches, it's funny. When you know that Barney had a future and lost it to a beer Homer handed him at a teenage party, it is something else. The show does not linger on this, it states it and moves on, but it sits in the viewer's memory. In Season 10, the show gave Barney a feature-length moment in the episode A Star is Burns, in which he submits a film to the Springfield Film Festival. The film is a surreal, black and white, deeply personal meditation on alcoholism. It is, within the context of the episode, acknowledged as genuine art. Barney sobers up briefly after this, entering a period of recovery. He learns to fly a helicopter. He is, for a few episodes, a transformed person. Then, somewhere around Season 11 or 12, he drifts back to the bar. The show does not make a statement about this. It simply happens, quietly, the way relapses happen, without drama, without announcement, just a return to the old self. Barney Gumble's arc is one of the few in the show's history that feels genuinely sad in retrospect, not because the show made it sad, but because the fragments of his character, assembled over years, form a picture of a real kind of human tragedy. The wasted potential, the single pivotal moment, the attempt to change, the slide back. It is not a story the show ever told in full. It is a story the show told by accident, in the gaps between jokes. Now consider Chief Wiggum. Wiggum is Springfield's police chief, and he is almost entirely ineffective. He is lazy, underpaid, occasionally corrupt, often bribed with donuts. He is an easy satirical target. The show uses him to comment on the failures of American law enforcement, on the gap between the authority institutions claim and the competence they actually demonstrate. In broad strokes, he is a buffoon. But there is a softer version of Wiggum, visible in the episodes that focus on his family, particularly his relationship with his son Ralph. Ralph Wiggum is Springfield Elementary's most baffling student, a child who exists, apparently, in a state of complete detachment from ordinary reality, saying things that make no sense, drawing connections that have no logic, experiencing the world in a way that is either deeply disturbed or deeply enlightened, depending on your reading. He says things like, "My cat's breath smells like cat food," and "I bent my Wookiee," and "When I grow up, I want to be a principal or a caterpillar." These lines are absurdist comedy gold. They are also, in their own way, a portrait of a child who does not fit into the world around him. Wiggum, in the episodes that show him with Ralph, is never contemptuous of his son. He is protective. He is, in a way that the show renders with real tenderness underneath the comedy, proud of Ralph in a way that doesn't require Ralph to make sense. There is an episode in which Ralph gets a significant role in the school's President's Day pageant, and Wiggum's response, his genuine, uncomplicated pride in his weird, unclassifiable child, is played with enough sincerity that it briefly turns into something approaching emotion. Wiggum is a failure at his job. He is a success as a father in the specific way that success means. He loves his son without condition, even when his son is impossible to understand. This is the kind of character note that the show scattered through its best seasons without ever making a big deal of it. Wiggum is not redeemed. He is not given a dramatic arc. He just occasionally shows you that underneath the incompetence there is a man who loves his kid, and that is enough. Sideshow Bob, Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr., deserves an extended examination because he is the closest thing the show has ever had to a genuine antagonist, and his character contains more sustained contradiction than almost anyone else in Springfield. Bob begins as a sideshow performer, a classically trained intellectual forced by circumstance and professional compromise to serve as the silent buffoon sidekick to Krusty the Clown, a job he regards with absolute contempt. His pivot to crime begins as a kind of revenge against Krusty, against a culture that preferred sees vulgarity built to Bob's refinement, and his subsequent criminal career is driven by two things: a genuine desire for certain things that the world has denied him, and an inexhaustible hatred of Bart Simpson. The hatred is earned, in Bob's view. Bart unmasked him. Bart sent him to prison. Everything that followed, the multiple escapes, the assassination attempts, the elaborate scheme is, in Bob's mind, justified by the original injustice. He was the victim first. He would have been content to frame Krusty and move on with his life. Bart intervened. The obsession that followed is, Bob would argue, Bart's fault. This is delusional, of course, but it is internally consistent delusion, which is what makes Bob compelling. He is not simply evil. He is a man with grievance who has organized his entire identity around that grievance, and in doing so has become something that bears no resemblance to the person he might have been. There is a Bob who went to college, who read Noel Coward, who longed for a career in the theater or the arts, who wanted to be taken seriously. That Bob is still visible in the current Bob, in his speech patterns, his cultural references, his theatrical tendency to soliloquize, but he has been hollowed out by obsession. What remains is performance without substance, the manners of an educated man deployed in service of genuinely deranged aims. The episode Sideshow Bob Roberts, in which Bob runs for mayor of Springfield on a conservative platform and wins through vote fraud, contains one of the most precise portraits of Bob's particular pathology. He is an excellent politician, speaks well, he has genuine positions. He wins the election, takes office, and immediately begins abusing power in ways that harm the community. The parallels to real political figures are clear and deliberate. But what makes the episode interesting is that Bob, in office, is also efficient. Things get done. Springfield's problems, some of them, are addressed. The show does not deny Bob's competence. It simply notes that competence in service of the wrong values is its own kind of disaster. Then there is the Cape Fear episode, widely considered one of the greatest in the show's history, in which Bob is released from prison and tracked down Bart and the Simpson family as they enter the Witness Protection Program. The episode escalates through a series of increasingly elaborate attempts on Bart's life, all of which fail for increasingly absurd reasons. The rake gag alone, in which Bob steps on a rake and is hit in the face by its handle, then steps on another rake, then another, in a sequence that goes on much longer than any rake gag has any right to, is one of the most precisely timed comedy sequences in television history. But the episode also contains a moment of genuine darkness. Bob, cornered, facing down Bart, being asked to sing the entire score of HMS Pinafore before carrying out the murder. Bob agrees. He sings. The stalling is obvious to everyone, including Bob. But he sings anyway, because he cannot help being who he is. Even at his most dangerous, he remains himself, an artist performing. Sideshow Bob has never successfully killed Bart. Across dozens of episodes, across 30 years, across elaborate schemes that have brought him close on multiple occasions, he has not managed to do the one thing he has organized his life around. This is partly plot logic. Bart cannot die. But the show has occasionally acknowledged this dynamic with enough self-awareness to suggest something more. There is a reading of Bob in which he does not actually want to succeed. His identity is built on the pursuit. If Bart died, Bob would have nothing. The obsession would be over. What would he be without it? The Bob who cannot kill Bart is perhaps the Bob who is choosing not to. Choosing, at some level below his conscious mind, to preserve the thing that gives him purpose. Move further into Springfield's population, and you find groundskeeper Willie. Willie is Scottish. He works for Springfield Elementary, maintaining the grounds, and he is the most physically imposing character in the regular cast. Enormous, powerful, covered in muscle, with a red mullet and a temper that arrives without warning. He is chronically underpaid. He is often mistreated by Principal Skinner and Superintendent Chalmers. He lives in a shack on school property. He appears to have no life outside of the school. The backstory the show has provided for Willie is tragic in the particular way that comedy about working-class characters is often tragic. It is played for laughs, but the actual content, if you sit with it, is genuinely grim. Willie has, across various episodes, mentioned losing his home in Scotland, losing a woman he loved, being humiliated in various professional and personal contexts, being overlooked and dismissed by everyone around him. He processes all of this through explosive outbursts that are gone as quickly as they arrive, leaving no lasting impression on anyone around him. Willie is a man to whom things happen, and who has no power to change them, and who keeps going anyway. His Scottish pride is real, not a joke at Scotland's expense, so much as a portrait of how people hold on to identity when circumstance has stripped everything else. He is proudly, defiantly, completely Willie, even when Willie means living in a shack and cleaning up after children who do not. Notice him. In the Treehouse specials, Willie dies every year. In the regular show, he is eternal. There is something fitting about this. In the show's real world, Willie cannot be destroyed. The systems that produced him, the grinding economic structure of Springfield, the hierarchy that places someone like Chalmers above someone like Willie, regardless of basic human dignity, are also eternal. Willie survives because the conditions that created him survive. His death in the Halloween specials is perhaps the show's unconscious fantasy of release for him. Professor John I.Q. Frink Jr. Professor Frink warrants attention because he represents something the show has never quite resolved. The question of what intelligence is for in Springfield. Frink is a genius. This is not contested. He has built, over the course of the series, a staggering range of technologies. Teleportation devices, time machines, artificial intelligences, dimensional portals, cloning apparatuses, various inventions that solve problems no one in Springfield has quite recognized as problems. He speaks in a stream of technobabble that is both parodic and specific enough to be occasionally accurate. He is a walking satire of scientific culture, the narrowly focused expert, unable to communicate across disciplinary boundaries, unable to translate genuine knowledge into ordinary life. But Frink is also lonely. His inventions are consistently either ignored, misused, or accidentally catastrophic. Springfield does not need what Frink offers it. The town's problems, spiritual, emotional, community level, are not engineering problems, and Frink's approach cannot touch them. There is a season 16 episode in which Frink's father, voiced by Jerry Lewis in a beautifully strange guest appearance, is resurrected from the dead and runs amok in Springfield before finally departing to devour Las Vegas. The episode is bizarre, even by Simpsons standards, but within it is a quietly affecting portrayal of Frink's relationship with a father who never quite saw him, a father who even now, returned from death, does not quite understand what his son has done with his life. Intelligence in Springfield is not a guarantee of anything. The show's treatment of Frink makes this point without ever stating it. He is the smartest person in any room. He is also consistently not the most important person in any room. His intelligence is real, and it is useless, in the specific sense that usefulness the show measures by. Does it make you belong? Does it connect you to the people around you? By that measure, Frink is perpetually failing. The character who crystallizes this side character depth most completely is perhaps Apu Nahasape Mapatilon. Apu's legacy within American culture has become complicated. Hank Azaria, who voiced him, acknowledged in 2021 that the character had contributed to harmful Indian stereotypes and formally apologized. This context is real and important, but within the show, across the seasons in which he was most fully written, Apu is one of the most complete characters Springfield has produced. 1. He is a first-generation immigrant who holds a doctorate in computer science from Caltech and is currently managing a convenience store for a corporation that does not value him. He works ungodly hours. He has been shot multiple times. He takes a quiet, genuine pride in his work even when the work is thankless. He has a rich inner life, spiritual commitments, cultural loyalties, an aesthetic sensibility that Springfield mostly doesn't notice or care about. His marriage to Manjula, arranged but genuine, is treated with more complexity than most of the show's romantic relationships. The episode 8 Misbehavin', in which Apu and Manjula have octuplets and are then exploited by Springfield's media entertainment apparatus, is a dark comedy about what happens when private life becomes public spectacle. Apu's family is used, commodified, and then forgotten when the spectacle fades. The accumulated weight of these side characters is part of what made Springfield feel, in the show's best seasons, like an actual place. Springfield was not populated by background people. It was populated by people who had histories, who wanted things, who were shaped by specific circumstances, who carried invisible weights. The show didn't always have time to explore these things fully, but it left enough fragments that viewers could do the work themselves. And 30 plus years later, those fragments remain small lights in the corners of a vast familiar world. Section 6. Lost episodes. Banned content. And the things Springfield couldn't show. Every long-running television show accumulates, over the years, a shadow library. Episodes that were pulled. Scenes that were cut. Episodes that aired once and were never rebroadcast. Content that became, for one reason or another, something the network or the producers decided the world should not see again. For most shows, this shadow library is a footnote, a few cut scenes, a couple of network interference stories. For The Simpsons, the shadow library is extensive, and what it contains reveals something significant about the history of American culture over the past 3 decades. The most famous entry in this library is The City of New York versus Homer Simpson, which aired in Season 9 in 1997 and was pulled from syndication after September 11, 2001. The episode follows Homer as he travels to New York City to retrieve his car, which has been booted to the World Trade Center. The episode is, by most accounts, a genuinely good one. Homer's relationship with New York City is complicated by a childhood visit that went badly, and his reluctance to return plays against the visual spectacle of a 1997 New York that is vibrant and alive in a way that later seems almost unbearably poignant. The episode includes extended sequences at the Twin Towers. The towers are part of the setting, casually and ordinarily, as landmarks that were simply there. After September 11, Fox and many local affiliates chose not to rebroadcast the episode. It was not a formal ban. It was a quiet, industry-wide agreement that certain imagery had become too painful, that the context of viewing had changed irrevocably, that an episode in which the Twin Towers were background scenery could not be experienced the same way in a post-September 11 world. The episode eventually returned to syndication and streaming, but it remained off the air for years. Some viewers have never seen it in its original broadcast context. The decision is understandable. It is also, in retrospect, a fascinating document of how quickly cultural context can make ordinary content unviewable, not through censorship, but through grief. The episode did not change. The towers did not change in the episode. What changed was the world around them, and that change was enough to make the images feel like something other than comedy. There is a subset of fans who argue that the episode's long absence from syndication has made it, paradoxically, one of the most watched episodes of the show, because it became rare, because it was sought out rather than passively received, because the story of its suppression became part of its identity. Episodes that are banned or pulled develop a gravity that available episodes do not have. The restriction becomes part of the meaning. The episode Stark Raving Dad from Season 3 involves Homer being sent to a mental institution and meeting a large white man who claims to be Michael Jackson. The character is voiced by an actor credited as John J. Smith, actually Michael Jackson himself, performing under a pseudonym. The episode is one of the most beloved in the show's history. Michael Jackson's uncredited presence was an open secret for years before it was confirmed. The episode contains one of the most emotionally resonant sequences in the show's run. Bart has forgotten Lisa's birthday. Over the course of the episode, the Jackson character helps him write and perform a birthday song that reconciles the siblings. The song, Happy Birthday Lisa, is simple and sweet in a way that feels genuinely touching. In 2019, following the release of the documentary Leaving Neverland, which detailed allegations of child sexual abuse against Michael Jackson, the show's producers, Al Jean, James L. Brooks, Matt Groening, made the decision to pull Stark Raving Dad from circulation. They removed it from Fox's platforms, from Disney Plus, from syndication. The decision was immediate and without equivocation. Al Jean stated that the producers did not want to perpetuate Jackson's memory in a way that might harm his alleged victims. This is a different kind of removal than the New York episode. The New York episode was pulled because external events changed the emotional register of its content. Stark Raving Dad was pulled because the person at its center had been credibly accused of terrible things. The episode itself, the content, the storyline, the birthday song, is not implicated in those accusations. Lisa's birthday song does not become harmful because of what Jackson is alleged to have done. But the episode was made with his participation, with his voice, as a celebration of his presence, and that context could not be separated from what was now known about him. The removal of Stark Raving Dad is a case study in what happens when art and the person who made it become inseparable. The episode exists. Copies exist. Fans who recorded it on VHS in 1991 still have it. It will never be fully gone. But the show's deliberate decision to remove it from official platforms is a statement about how the people who made it feel about what it now means. They chose not to profit from it. They chose not to celebrate it. They left it in the shadow library. There is a segment of the fandom that disagrees with this decision, who argue that the art should be separable from the artist, that Lisa's birthday song remains beautiful, regardless of what the man singing it may have done in private, that removing the episode is a form of historical revisionism that deserves the show's legacy. This is a genuine argument, and it has been made seriously by people who care about the show. The counter-argument that some forms of artistic collaboration cannot be disentangled from the person collaborating is also serious. The show sits, unresolved, in the shadow library. Brazil's response to the Simpsons episode, Blame It on Lisa, from season 13, is a different category of controversy entirely. The episode, in which the Simpsons travel to Rio de Janeiro to find a missing child Bart has been sponsoring through a charity, portrays Brazil through a series of exaggerated stereotypes. Rampant crime, kidnappings, rats in the streets, the general sense that Rio is a barely contained chaos. The Brazilian Tourism Board formally protested the episode. Government officials were involved. There were calls for Fox to apologize. Fox did not apologize. The show's producers pointed out that The Simpsons portrayed every culture with equal irreverence, that Brazil was not being singled out, that satire is not required to be flattering. The controversy died down. The episode continued to air. What makes this case interesting is not the controversy itself, but what it reveals about how the show's cultural reach had expanded by season 13. In 1991, The Simpsons was an American show commenting on American life. By 2002, it was a global cultural phenomenon, and any episode that touched on another country was being watched and evaluated by that country's citizens and government, with a seriousness that American network television had rarely provoked. Brazil's response was strong enough to make international news because the show was important enough internationally for Brazil to care. The very controversy was evidence of The Simpsons' cultural weight. The episode Homer's Enemy from season 8 is a different kind of sensitive episode, not one that was pulled, but one that was recognized at the time of its creation as something that pushed against the show's own premises in a way that could not be undone. Frank Grimes is a new employee at the Springfield nuclear power plant who has achieved everything he has through hard work, sacrifice, and genuine competence. He had a terrible childhood. He educated himself in his spare time. He is, by any measurable standard, a better person and a better employee than Homer Simpson. He is also deeply, constantly miserable at Springfield, because he is the only person in Springfield who experiences it the way a real person would. Springfield, to Frank Grimes, is an unacceptable nightmare. A place where an incompetent man who nearly caused multiple nuclear disasters is celebrated while Grimes's genuine achievements go unrecognized. Homer, in this episode, is genuinely baffling and genuinely harmful in a way that the show rarely allows him to be. His obliviousness is not comic. It is, from Grimes's perspective, an ongoing assault. He wins a children's model building contest because no one told him it was for children. He has a home and a family and has been to space, despite all evidence that he should not have any of these things. Grimes, encountering this, concludes that being good and being competent are irrelevant to outcomes in Springfield. He has a breakdown. He mimics Homer's recklessness, touching a high-voltage wire without rubber gloves because Homer would touch it without consequence and is electrocuted and dies. Springfield, at Grimes's funeral, immediately forgets him. Homer falls asleep and shouts something about a fictional episode of television, and the mourners laugh. Grimes is buried. The episode ends. The writers have said that Homer's Enemy was a deliberate experiment in asking what would happen if a real person entered Springfield. The answer, the episode argues, is that they would be destroyed. Springfield is not hospitable to realistic expectations. Its logic is different from the world Frank Grimes came from, and that logic is brutal for anyone who refuses to accept it on its own terms. Grimes refused. He died. This reading makes Homer's Enemy one of the most unnerving episodes in the show's history. It is not unnerving because of anything horror adjacent. There are no monsters, no supernatural events. It is unnerving because it turns the show's own internal logic into a weapon and uses it to kill a character who represents the viewer's perspective. Grimes looks at Homer and sees what we might see if we actually thought about Homer's life objectively. The show kills Grimes for this. The show is saying, perhaps without meaning to, do not look at this too clearly. Do not apply external logic. Accept Springfield on its own terms. or the experience will destroy you. There is also the long history of content the show cut before airing. Deleted scenes from The Simpsons are not publicly available in any comprehensive form. The show has never released a complete DVD collection with full deleted scenes across all seasons. But interviews with writers and animators have revealed that the show regularly cut material that was considered too dark, too politically sharp, too potentially offensive, or simply too long. Some of this material has been described in enough detail to create a sense of what it contained. Scenes of Homer's drinking that were cut because they played it as genuinely sad rather than comic. Scenes of Marge's unhappiness that were cut because they shifted the emotional register of episodes too far in the direction of drama. Lines of dialogue from Springfield's background characters that were considered too harsh. The cut material that has occasionally surfaced, in commentaries, in interviews, in rare cases in bootleg recordings, suggests that the show's writers were consistently navigating a line between the show's comedic premise and the darker human material that premise contained. The things that were cut were, frequently, the things that had gone too far into truth. Springfield requires a certain ambient brightness to function as a habitable space for comedy. When the material went too dark, too specific, unresolvable, it was removed. What remained was the Springfield viewers know, warm enough to return to, sharp enough to cut occasionally, but never allowed to bleed. The Shadow Library is, in this sense, the show's record of its own negotiations with itself. Every pulled episode, every banned scene, every cut sequence represents a moment in which the show encountered the limits of what it could be and chose to stay on the inhabitable side of those limits. What lies in the Shadow Library is the show that might have existed in a different set of choices, darker, more realistic, more willing to follow its own implications wherever they led. That show does not exist, but the traces of it are everywhere. Section 7, The Writer's Room, Harvard Minds, Hidden Messages, and Real Confessions. The Simpsons has employed, over its run, a writer's room that is unlike anything else in the history of American television. The show's early writers, the people who shaped it in seasons 3 through 8, the seasons that most fans consider the show's creative peak, were almost uniformly graduates of elite universities, frequently Harvard, with backgrounds in academic writing, literary criticism, philosophy, or comedy. This was unusual for network television, which tended to be staffed by people who had come up through more conventional comedy pipelines. The Simpsons was staffed by people who had read Dostoevsky and could write a joke about it. This creates a show with a double nature. On the surface, The Simpsons is a family sitcom about a working-class family in a small American city. Underneath, it is a show made by people who were simultaneously mocking and participating in American intellectual culture, who brought the anxieties of their own educational backgrounds into their scripts, who used the fictional Simpson family to process things they could not say directly in the world they actually inhabited. The Harvard pipeline deserves a moment of consideration. The Harvard Lampoon, the university's humor magazine, has been sending writers to Hollywood for decades, but the concentration of Lampoon alumni in the early Simpsons writers' room was remarkable. Conan O'Brien, who later became a late-night television host of considerable fame, wrote for the show in its early seasons and produced 2 of its most celebrated episodes, Marge vs. the Monorail and Homer Goes to College. Jeff Martin, Greg Daniels, David Silverman. The early writers' room was a gathering of some of the sharpest young comedic minds in America, and the show they produced reflected this in ways both obvious and subtle. The obvious ways include the show's density of reference. A single episode of Simpsons in its peak years might contain allusions to classical literature, film history, political theory, psychology, music, and several layers of meta-commentary about television itself. The references were layered, so that the surface joke worked for any viewer, while deeper jokes were available only to those who caught the illusion. This created a show that could be watched at multiple levels simultaneously. A family comedy for children, a sharp satire for adults, and a dense cultural essay for anyone who wanted to decode it. The subtler ways are more interesting. The early writers were, in many cases, people who had been academically high-achieving and were now writing for what the wider world considered lowbrow entertainment. This tension was productive. It generated a particular kind of comedy, jokes about intellectual aspiration and its failure, jokes about the gap between what people know and how they live, jokes about the specific humiliation of being smart in a world that rewards other qualities. Homer's anti-intellectualism is partly a projection of the writer's fears about themselves. The show's celebration of stupidity has always been partly ironic. a Harvard graduate's guilty pleasure in imagining a version of life unencumbered by the things Harvard teaches you to want. George Meyer, who has been described by multiple sources as the single most important writer in the show's history, is a particular figure worth examining. Meyer is famously private. He rarely gives interviews. His writing credits are enormous. He has been a staff writer from very early in the show's run through many of its best seasons. But his specific contributions are hard to attribute because writing credits in television are collective. What is known from the interviews he has given and the accounts of colleagues is that Meyer brought an unusual sensibility to the room. Darker, more interested in genuine absurdism, more willing to follow a joke past the comfortable ending into something stranger and more unsettling. Meyer is associated with a particular comedic technique that the show deploys frequently in its best work: the joke that keeps going. The standard comedic rhythm in network television has a setup, a punchline, and a move to the next thing. Meyer's instinct was to let the joke continue past the punchline, to let the character or situation stay in the space the joke opened up rather than retreating to safety. The rate gag in Cape Fear is an example of this. The joke keeps going because it becomes funnier the longer it continues, and because the commitment to the bit is itself part of the comedy. But the technique also applies to emotional content. The show's ability to sustain a feeling, to let a moment be sad or strange or uncomfortable beyond the point where the laugh diffuses it, comes from the same refusal to retreat to safety too quickly. The writers' room dynamics that produced the show's best work were notoriously intense. John Swartzwelder, another legendary staff writer, wrote more produced scripts for the show than any other person in its history, somewhere in the region of 60 episodes, before eventually stopping and writing novels. He is known to be extremely reclusive. He has given almost no public interviews. His episodes are distinguished by a particular flavor of absurdist surrealism, a willingness to take Springfield's internal logic to extreme conclusions, and a darkness that the show's format contained but never fully resolved. His scripts frequently involved premises that should not have worked. Flanders running a leftorium, Homer becoming a professional food critic, Springfield building a monorail, and made them work through sheer internal consistency. Swartzwelder is also known for having typed his scripts in a diner booth after the California smoking ban required him to smoke outside the writer's room. He reportedly purchased a diner booth and had it installed in his house so he could continue working in the environment he was accustomed to. This detail, which has circulated in the show's lore, says something about the specific kind of genius the show attracted. People with very particular working conditions, very particular obsessions, very particular ways of producing the material that made the show what it was. The writer's room has also been a source of genuine political content that was inserted deliberately into the show's broad comedic frame, counting on the frame to make the content available to audiences who might resist it in a more direct form. The show has always leaned politically left, and this orientation was embedded in its earliest characterizations. Burns represents unchecked capital accumulation, the political establishment of Springfield. Mayor Quimby, Chief Wiggum, the media as personified by Kent Brockman, represents how institutional structures serve power regardless of the individuals within them. The show did not hide these politics, but it delivered them in a form sufficiently entertaining that viewers across the political spectrum found the show enjoyable even when its politics were implicitly critical of things they valued. There is a documented history of the show predicting, through extrapolation and satirical logic, things that subsequently happened in the real world. The predictions have been cataloged extensively online. A Simpsons episode appeared to predict smartwatches, tablet computers, 3D printed cars, the Higgs boson discovery, and various other technological and political developments, sometimes years before they occurred. The show's writers have consistently argued that these are not predictions but coincidences, that the show explored so many scenarios across so many episodes that some were bound to resemble subsequent reality by chance, and that the predictions that seem impressive are noticed while the many scenarios that did not come to pass are forgotten. This is almost certainly correct as an explanation, but it doesn't fully account for the feeling that the show generated, the sense that it understood something about the direction American society was traveling. The Simpsons was most accurate as a predictor, not because its writers had supernatural insight, but because they were smart, educated people paying close attention to existing trends and following them logically. The show's prediction of a Donald Trump presidency, which appears in a 2000 Treehouse of Horror, episode in which Lisa takes over after President Trump has bankrupted the country is not mystical. It is the product of people who understood how celebrity culture and political culture were converging, and who followed the implication. That the implication turned out to be accurate says more about the coherence of their analysis than about any gift for prophecy. Writers have occasionally, over the years, spoken publicly about what the show meant to them personally, about how it functioned as a space for processing real feelings and experiences through fictional forms. Several early writers have talked about using the show to work through family dynamics. Al John has discussed writing Marge as a way of examining what it looks like when someone suppresses their own desires in service of the family. Homer's relationship with his father has been described by multiple writers as drawing on real generational wounds, the specific pain of a parent who was physically present but emotionally unavailable, who expressed love inadequately, who left children with a permanent searching quality. These confessions matter because they explain why the show, at its best, felt like it contained something real inside its animated frame. It was not simply observational comedy about working-class American life. It was in part a series of emotional confessions made through displacement. The writers feeling things they couldn't say directly and finding them a home in Homer, and Marge and Bart and Lisa's, in Springfield's perpetual autumn light, in the domestic rituals of a family that was always both completely ordinary and quietly extraordinary. The writers who came later, after the peak seasons, as the show continued into the 2000s and 2010s and beyond, have spoken about the challenge of working in the show's shadow. The early seasons had established a standard that was difficult to maintain, not because the later writers were less talented, but because the show had changed what it was. The early seasons had the benefit of novelty, of characters who were still being discovered, of a cultural moment that was ready to receive something like The Simpsons. Later seasons were working with characters whose possibilities had been extensively explored, in a cultural moment that had moved on, making a show that the audience would measure against a memory of what had once been. This is an almost impossible position. The writers who navigated it deserve more credit than they typically receive. What the writers' room produced, taken as a whole, is one of the most sustained comedic achievements in the history of American culture. The show's run spans events that transformed country: the end of the Cold War, September 11th, the 2008 financial crisis, the rise of social media, the collapse of traditional television economics. The Springfield it depicts has remained, in certain respects, unchanged through all of this. The same family, the same house, the same power plant, the same donut. But the show's response to these events, mediated through its comedic frame, has created a kind of continuous cultural record, a 30-year document of how American storytellers made sense of American life. The show's longevity itself is a kind of argument. Television series rarely survive the cultural conditions that produce them. The Simpsons has survived because it found in its premise something genuinely elastic, a family and a town that could absorb almost anything, a comedic frame that could hold darkness and joy simultaneously, a set of characters resilient enough to keep returning to without exhaustion. The writers who have worked on it across its run have, whatever their individual contributions, participated in something larger than themselves. They have been the custodians of a shared space that millions of people have returned to across decades. A space that has functioned, for many of its viewers, as something like home. And that, the maintenance of that home, the keeping of that space available and warm, is perhaps the most significant thing the writer's room has done. Not the Harvard references. Not the satirical politics. Not the extraordinary comedy, the home. Springfield as a place you can return to. The porch light always on. Section 8, The Darker Simpsons. Depression, grief, and what the show never quite says. There is a reading of The Simpsons, not the only valid reading, but a persistent one, in which the show is fundamentally about sadness, about the quiet, undramatic, everyday sadness that accumulates in ordinary lives. The comedy is real. The warmth is real. But underneath the warmth, the show has always known things about disappointment and longing and the small surrenders of adult life that it mostly chose not to say directly. This reading begins with Homer. Homer Simpson is one of the most complex characters in the history of American comedy, though complexity is distributed across years of episodes, rather than concentrated in any single narrative. The Homer of the early seasons is broad and often cruel. He is lazy, he is selfish, he strangles his son as a reflexive response to frustration. He lies casually. He prioritizes his own comfort over his family's consistently. He is funny because his appetites are outsized. and his self-awareness is negligible. He does not carry the weight of his own behavior. But there are episodes scattered through the show's history in which the weight becomes briefly visible. Homer has dreams that the show occasionally acknowledges, dreams that existed before the life he settled into. In one episode, he carries a note inside his wallet, a note he wrote to himself years ago, listing the things he intended to do with his life. The camera holds on the note long enough for the viewer to read it. None of the things on it have happened. The episode does not linger on this. It moves on, but the image sits there, a man carrying, in his pocket, evidence of the distance between who he intended to be and who he became. This is the show's deepest form of sadness, not tragedy, not breakdown, but the specific everyday grief of deferred lives. Homer wanted things. He still wants things, somewhere under the appetite and the obliviousness. He wanted to be a rock musician. He auditioned for a band in his youth and was rejected, and the rejection settled into him in ways he does not talk about. He wanted to matter. The show has always known that Homer wants to matter, even when it is making jokes about his irrelevance. The episode And Maggie Makes Three, from season 6, is one of the most affecting in the show's run, precisely because it addresses this directly. The episode is structured as Homer telling the story of Maggie's birth via flashback. Before Maggie was conceived, Homer had achieved his lifelong dream. He quit the power plant and worked at a bowling alley, a job he loved with complete, uncomplicated happiness. His days were simple. His work meant nothing globally, but it meant something to him. He was, within the frame of that small ambition, genuinely content. Then Marge became pregnant, and Homer had to return to the power plant, and his bowling alley days ended. Mr. Burns, rehiring him, placed a motivational plaque above Homer's workstation that read, "Don't forget, you're here forever," a taunt, a reminder of permanent defeat. Homer's response to this, which we see at the end of the episode, is to cover the plaque with photographs of Maggie, so that what it reads instead is, "Do it for her." The photographs transform the defeat into something he can live with. He is here forever. But the reason is Maggie. The reason is worth it. This is the most precisely sentimental moment in the show's history. It works because it earns the sentiment. The episode has established the cost, the sacrifice, the specific thing Homer gave up, and because the solution Homer finds is not a denial of the cost, but a reframing of it. He did not get what he wanted. He got something else. He chose to find that sufficient. Whether this is genuine peace or elaborate self-deception, the show wisely declines to resolve. It is probably both. Marge's sadness is a different quality. Where Homer's sadness is blunt and mostly unconscious, Marge's has a refined, careful quality, the sadness of a person who has decided not to have it, who has constructed a domestic world of sufficient order and warmth that the sadness cannot quite find the door. Marge wanted to be an artist. She is genuinely talented. Several episodes have established this. She has set aside this talent so completely that it barely registers in her daily life. When it resurfaces, usually in episodes centered on her creative ambitions, there's a brief window in which she is more fully herself than at any other point. And then the window closes, and she returns to the laundry, the cooking, the patient management of the family's chaos. There is a reading of Marge in which she is not simply a selfless homemaker, but a woman in a state of permanent managed grief. The life she is living is not the life she imagined. She loves her family genuinely and completely, but love is not the same as fulfillment. And the show has always known this, even when it couldn't quite say it. The episodes in which Marge is given space to want something for herself, to paint, to act, to pursue a career, to have a conversation that is not about Homer or the children, are among the show's most quietly radical. They are the show briefly allowing Marge to be a complete person rather than a function. The episode Fear of Flying from season 6 is another of the show's deep dives into this territory. Marge discovers that she has a deep-seated fear of flying, which leads her to a therapist, which leads to an extended excavation of her childhood and its unresolved contents. The episode is unusual for The Simpsons because it takes therapy seriously. Not as a joke, not as a cultural target, but as a process. The therapy scenes are patient and specific. The therapist asks real questions. Marge resists and then slowly engages. The resolution is not triumphant. Her fear is not eliminated. She is not cured. But she has a better understanding of herself at the end than at the beginning. For a network animated comedy, this is a remarkably honest portrait of what therapy actually looks like. The show's treatment of depression is most explicit in a recurring way in its portrayal of Bart. This is rarely discussed, but the evidence across the show's run is considerable. Bart is troubled in ways that the comedy mostly manages but doesn't resolve. He is destructive. He is unable to sustain academic effort. He has a difficulty connecting with the consequences of his actions that the show plays as carelessness, but which also resembles the emotional disconnection that characterizes certain forms of childhood depression. The episodes in which Bart is allowed genuine feeling. The episode Bart's Dog Gets an F, in which he must train Santa's little helper or lose him, and discovers in the process a real capacity for patience and love. The episode Bart Gets Famous, in which he experiences the hollowness of celebrity. The episode Homie the Clown, which touches his relationship with Krusty, are the episodes in which he is most fully a person rather than a comedic device. Bart's sadness tends to be loneliness. He is popular in a superficial way. He has peers who think of him as a legend, a figure to admire, but genuine emotional intimacy is difficult for him. His friendship with Milhouse is the closest thing he has to a deep relationship, and the show has treated it with real warmth. The two boys who need each other, who drive each other to distraction, who would be significantly worse off without the other. There is a Season 4 episode in which Bart and Milhouse's friendship dissolves over a trivial disagreement, and the episode tracks Bart's experience of this loss with an accuracy that is almost uncomfortable. Bart without Milhouse is a Bart who has no one who actually knows him. The friendship's restoration, when it comes, is treated as genuinely important, not as a comedy beat, as a genuine repair. Lisa's sadness is the show's most articulate, because Lisa is the show's most articulate character. She knows she is unhappy. She has a vocabulary for it. She has tried, across seasons, to understand why a girl who is so intelligent, so genuinely talented, so morally serious, cannot quite find peace. The answer the show's built, cumulatively, is that Lisa's intelligence is also a form of suffering, that seeing clearly is not always a gift, that Springfield is not a place that was built for someone like her, that her gifts isolate her as much as they define her. Lisa and her saxophone are the show's most sustained image of this. A child alone in her room, playing music that is genuinely beautiful, in a house that doesn't quite hear it. The saxophone was given to her by Bleeding Gums Murphy, a jazz musician who befriends her in an early episode and dies later, and whose death the show treats with real emotional weight. Lisa's grief for Murphy, someone who genuinely understood something about her, who heard the music she was making, is the most purely sad sequence the show produced in its early seasons. She is on a rooftop, playing, and the sound of her saxophone rises and is heard by a passing cloud, and the cloud rains, and somewhere a newly planted tree drinks the rain. The show briefly allows her sadness to be cosmic. It allows it to matter at a scale larger than the comedy can normally hold. Grandpa Simpson, Abraham Simpson, carries the show's meditation on age and obsolescence. He lives in a retirement home that no one visits regularly, with full knowledge that his family finds him a burden, with a mind that he knows is slipping. His stories are rambling and disconnected, moving through decades and references that his audience cannot follow. The show plays this for comedy, and the comedy often lands. There is a specific joke rhythm to Grandpa's non-sequiturs that is precisely tuned, but the underlying situation is not comic. He is an old man who is not wanted. His children tolerate him. His grandchildren mostly ignore him. He tells stories because story is how he maintains his sense of having been someone, of having had a life that meant something. There is a Season 4 episode, I Remember Abby, or rather the episode Lisa's Pony, in which Homer goes to extreme lengths to give Lisa a pony, working an overnight job to afford it, running himself ragged to maintain it, showing a side of himself that is devoted and genuinely loving in a way his ordinary self cannot sustain. There is also the episode Mother Simpson, in which Homer discovers that his mother, whom he believed to be dead, is alive, and he has one day with her, and she leaves again. And the episode ends with Homer sitting on the hood of his car looking up at the stars in a moment of complete stillness. No joke, no reset, just Homer, alone, under the stars, missing his mother. This is what the show can do when it chooses to. This is the register it touches and then moves away from. The sadness, when the show allows it, is real. Section 9. The Deep Iceberg. Springfield's Darkest Corners. The further you descend into Springfield, the stranger the light gets. Not stranger in the sense of supernatural. Not stranger in the sense of science fiction. But stranger in the way that familiar things become strange when you look at them long enough without blinking. Springfield is a place designed for quick passage. You are supposed to move through it at the speed of jokes, laughing at what the show points to, not looking too long at anything else. When you stop. When you actually stop and look at the corners, the edges, the things that are always present but never foregrounded, the picture changes. Let's talk about the food. Springfield's relationship with food is one of the show's most consistent themes and one of its most underexamined. Homer eats constantly and without discrimination. The Quickie Mart exists as a monument to processed food. The squishy, the mystery hot dog, the product whose ingredients are either proprietary or unknowable. Krusty Burger serves food that multiple episodes have established contains things that no burger should contain. Donut manufacturers and their products appear throughout the show with a frequency that feels less like product, integration, and more like ritual. Springfield eats the way Springfield does everything, with enthusiasm, without question, without any particular attention to where things came from or what they might be doing to people over time. The Quick E-Mart is owned by Apu and operated on behalf of a corporation whose name and origin are never fully established. The products it sells are not clearly sourced. The hot dogs rotate on a grill that has been operating continuously since when exactly? The show is not specific. Apu's familiarity with the products suggests he has been selling them for years. The customers who buy them return daily. The cycle is uninterrupted, and nobody in Springfield, not the health department, not concerned citizens, not the news media, ever investigates the contents of what the Quickie Mart is selling. When the radiation theory is applied to Springfield's food supply, the implications compound. If the water table is contaminated, then the food grown in Springfield's soil is also contaminated. The corn, the wheat, the vegetables that make up any local agricultural production. All of it is drawing from the same aquifer that the nuclear plant has been leaking into for decades. The animals that graze on Springfield's land drink from Springfield's water. The fish pulled from Springfield's river have 3 eyes. What about the rest of the local food chain? The show does not ask. The characters do not ask. They eat. Homer's body, as discussed earlier, is essentially indestructible. But it is also, when you look at it clearly, grotesque in ways the show has normalized through years of familiarity. His weight fluctuates across episodes without explanation. His relationship with food resembles addiction more than appetite. The compulsive quality of his eating, the way it persists regardless of circumstance or consequence, the way it provides comfort in moments of stress or emptiness, the way nothing seems sufficient to fill the specific hunger he carries. Homer eats the way people eat when they are trying to manage something they cannot name. The donut is the show's most persistent symbol, and it repays examination. In Christian iconography, the circle symbolizes eternity, no beginning, no end. The donut, a circle with a hole in its center, is eternity with an absence at its heart. Homer's relationship with donuts is one of the most densely referenced in American comedic history. He dreams of them. He worships them. In one episode, he quite literally trades his soul to the devil for a donut. And the devil, notably, is unable to fully claim Homer's soul because Homer has already given it, in some implicit sense, to Marge and his children. The donut is the symbol of Homer's appetite, which is to say the symbol of his longing, which is to say the symbol of the specific emptiness he carries and can never quite fill. That the show treats this as comedy is correct. It is also something else. Homer's donut is Homer's wound, and the wound has been visible for 36 years, and the show has laughed at it so consistently that it no longer registers as a wound. Now consider the school. Springfield Elementary is an institution of remarkable dysfunction. Its funding has been decimated by Burns's oil well. Its principal is an imposter. Its faculty includes teachers who hate their students openly, who drink in class, who have given up on education as a project and are simply maintaining the form of it. It is chronically underfunded, chronically understaffed, chronically failing the children placed in its care. The tests that leave Springfield's children at the bottom of national rankings are not extraordinary events. They are the regular and expected outcome of this institution's operation. And yet, Springfield Elementary is also, in the show's most affecting episodes, a genuine community, the plays, the band, the events that bring families together in the auditorium with whatever hope they can muster. There is something in Springfield Elementary that functions despite everything as a site of civic life. Mrs. Hoover is a bad teacher. Mrs. Papel, a more complex character than she first appeared, whose loneliness and disappointment the show acknowledged in its most vulnerable moments with her, was a teacher who had given up but who occasionally, against her better judgment, tried. Principal Skinner is an imposter, but the man he impersonated left a real commitment to education behind, and Skinner has honored that commitment in the only way available to him, by doing the job as well as he can, given that the job is thankless and the institution is underfunded and the community it serves is not particularly interested in what schools are supposed to do. Edna Krabappel deserves more consideration than she usually receives. She is, in the show's early seasons, a comedic foil for Bart, the teacher defeated by the student, the institutional authority unable to contain the chaos in her classroom. But over time, the show revealed a person of considerable depth underneath the exhaustion. Crabapple dated. She wanted love with a sincerity that the show sometimes played for laughs and sometimes played straight. Her relationship with Ned Flanders, which began in later seasons and became, briefly, a genuine romance, was treated with a warmth that surprised audiences who had not expected either character to be capable of it. She died, in real life, when Marcia Wallace, the actress who voiced her, passed away in 2013. The show acknowledged her death within the show itself. Bart wrote her name on a chalkboard, and the show paused to honor her. It was one of the few times The Simpsons broke its own frame to acknowledge something that was simply true. The intersection between Springfield Elementary and Springfield's power structure is mostly indirect but occasionally explicit. Burns's theft of the school's oil well is the most obvious example. The richest man in town actively depleting a resource that belonged to children and their education, redirecting it to his personal wealth without consequence. The school's perpetual underfunding is not unrelated to the town's economic structure. Springfield's economy depends on the power plant. The power plant depends on Burns. Burns has no interest in an educated population. An educated population asks harder questions. Springfield's school system is not simply underfunded by accident. It is underfunded by the logic of the system that produces Springfield's economy, a system that functions better when the population it employs does not look too carefully at its working conditions. This is a dark reading. The show does not state it. The show states it through the accumulation of details across years of episodes. The perpetually crumbling infrastructure, the chronically underpaid teachers, the consistent failure to provide children with what they need to become fully capable adults. Springfield's school is the canary the show has been lowering into the mine for 30 years. The retirement home where Grandpa Simpson lives warrants attention in the same register. Shady Pines, and its successor, the Springfield Retirement Castle, is depicted across many episodes as a place of profound neglect. The staff range from indifferent to actively cruel. The facilities are inadequate. The residents are lonely in ways that the comedy cannot fully contain. Homer visits rarely. When he does visit, he is often distracted, often trying to get away. Grandpa tells stories that Homer does not hear. The episode where Homer actually listens, where he sits down and lets Grandpa tell a story in full, and the story turns out to be about something deeply personal and important, about a life that was larger and stranger and more full of feeling than Homer had ever imagined, is one of the show's quietly devastating ones. The retirement home is where Springfield puts the people it has decided are finished. The people who can no longer produce, no longer contribute to the economic life of the town, no longer serve a function that the town recognizes. They are deposited there and visited occasionally and otherwise maintained at minimum cost and minimum attention. The show makes jokes about this. The show also knows that it is not funny. The same town that cannot acknowledge the poison in its water cannot acknowledge the failure in its care for the old. Both are symptoms of the same incapacity. Springfield's inability to sustain attention on things that do not produce immediate comfort. The religious life of Springfield adds another layer. Springfield has a church attended regularly, run by Reverend Lovejoy, who has gradually, over the show's run, lost essentially all faith in his own vocation. He is a man who became a minister out of genuine belief and has been worn down by 30 years of attending to a congregation's spiritual needs, while those needs turned out to be mostly about parking spaces and interpersonal grievances. The show has acknowledged this arc explicitly. There is an episode in which Lovejoy confesses to Ned Flanders that Ned's constant calls about trivial religious concerns were what finally broke him. He stopped believing because believing required attention, and Ned's needy faith exhausted all of his attentional capacity. He gave Ned too much and kept nothing for himself. This is a genuinely sad portrait of what can happen to religious vocation. Not a dramatic loss of faith precipitated by crisis, but a slow drain precipitated by the grinding demands of ministry. Lovejoy is still there. He still gives the sermons. He still administers the sacraments. He is going through the motions of belief with the thoroughness of someone who was trained well and has not forgotten the training, even if the feeling behind it has departed. In Springfield's religious life, as in its civic life, the forms persist long after the substance has gone. And then there is the matter of Springfield's economy more broadly. The town is a one-company town, and the company is the power plant, and the plant is Burns. This is an old American story. The mill town, the coal company town, the place whose entire economic life is organized around a single employer whose interests and the town's interests overlap, imperfectly and sometimes not at all. The history of such towns in America is not cheerful. The company provides employment. The company also controls wages, determines what safety measures are maintained, shapes the political environment through donations and influence, and remains in operation long past the point where its costs to the community exceed its benefits. Springfield has been living this story for as long as it has existed. The power plant employs a significant portion of the town's working population. Those employees are dependent on their paychecks in ways that make organized resistance essentially impossible. Burns is aware of this leverage and exercises it without hesitation. When a union forms, Burns defeats it. When safety concerns are raised, Burns ignores them. When the town's government attempts oversight, Burns purchases the relevant officials. The system is stable because every lever of potential accountability has been neutralized. The show plays all of this as comedy. Burns is a comic villain, outrageously old, outrageously evil, so cartoonishly self-interested that his villainy becomes funny. But the system he represents is not cartoonish. The system he represents is the ordinary mechanism of large-scale economic power in a society without adequate counterweights. Springfield is funny. The thing it is a portrait of is not. What makes this section of the iceberg so cold, the deep part, where the light has almost entirely gone, is this. Everything the show has been describing, in its 36-year run, through the lens of comedy, through the warm yellow light of Springfield, is real. The polluted water is real, in American cities that have Springfields of their own. The captured regulatory environment is real. The underfunded schools are real. The neglected elderly are real. The workers too dependent on their employers to demand better conditions are real. The community that has agreed not to look too closely at the things that would require it to act is real. The Simpsons has been making jokes about this for 36 years. The jokes are excellent. The thing underneath the jokes has never been funny. The show has been counting on the jokes to make it endurable, and it has. We have endured Springfield because Springfield is home, because the family is warm, because Homer always makes it back to the couch, because the theme music plays and everything resets. But the thing the show is describing does not reset. Outside Springfield, in the real Springfields, in the Flint, Michigans, and the Gary, Indianas, and the everywhere towns that share Springfield's economic structure, and Springfield's relationship with power, the credits do not roll. The water stays contaminated. The school stays underfunded. The old man in the retirement home is still alone. Springfield is a comedy. It is also a diagnosis. The dark corners of Springfield are not fiction. They are the show's way of telling us, in the gentlest possible register, what we already know. Section 10. The bottom of the iceberg. Theories so deep the show can't escape them there. Are theories about The Simpsons that exist in the comfortable shallows of the internet. The coma theory, the radiation theory, the who shot Burns debate. These are theories that the show's fan community has discussed openly for decades, that the show's own writers have acknowledged, that exist in a kind of public equilibrium with the official text. Then there are the theories that exist further down. Theories that the show did not invite and does not acknowledge. Theories that emerge not from deliberate authorial choice, but from the accumulated weight of 36 years of storytelling by hundreds of different people working on a single world. The theories that live at the bottom of the iceberg are the ones that feel, when you encounter them, like you were never supposed to find them. The first of these deep theories concerns the nature of Springfield's memory problem. We have discussed, elsewhere in this descent, the reset button, the mechanism by which Springfield forgets catastrophic events between episodes. The dome, the flooding, the nuclear near misses, the various world-ending events that the show has deployed as plot mechanisms, all wiped clean by the time the next episode begins. We have considered the possible explanations. Radiation-induced cognitive damage, Homer's dream state, collective denial, the social contract of comfortable forgetting. But there is a version of this theory that goes further, into territory the others do not reach. What if Springfield's memory problem is not a problem at all? What if it is a design feature, not of the show but of Springfield itself? Consider the following. Springfield exists geographically in an impossible location. It borders multiple states simultaneously. It has climate features from across the continent. Its history contradicts itself. Its residents' personal histories are inconsistent across episodes. Not just slightly inconsistent, fundamentally inconsistent, in ways that cannot be explained by writer error alone. Homer's childhood has been depicted in at least 4 distinct versions, each contradicting the others on basic facts. Marge's family history shifts. Side characters appear with completely different backstories in different episodes, as if the show is drawing from a database that has been shuffled. The deep theory holds that this is not inconsistency. It is Springfield's physics. Springfield is a place where memory does not work the same way it works elsewhere. The residents do not forget catastrophic events because of radiation or coma dream dynamics. They forget because memory itself functions differently in Springfield, not storing linear sequences, not maintaining consistent personal histories, but cycling through available narratives in a way that makes every present moment feel authentic, while the past remains perpetually malleable. This would explain why Burns can remember the Spanish-American War in one episode and have a different origin story in another. It would explain why Homer's mother died, and then was alive and then died again. It would explain why Springfield's physical geography is simultaneously everywhere and nowhere. Springfield is not a place that exists in normal space-time. It exists in a region where the standard relationship between past-present has been disrupted, perhaps by the same contamination that mutated its residents' biology, or perhaps by something older and more fundamental, something that preceded Burns and the power plant. The show has hinted at this obliquely in episodes that engage with Springfield's founding history. The town was founded by Jebediah Springfield, a historical figure whose legend the show has complicated in the episode Lisa the Iconoclast, in which Lisa discovers that Jebediah Springfield, the noble pioneer, the town's founding father, was actually a murderous pirate named Hans Sprungfeld who changed his identity, murdered a man, and built his civic mythology on deliberate falsehood. The town's entire origin story is a lie. Its founding figure was a con man. Springfield was built on fabricated history before Burns ever built the power plant. The forgetting is not new. It is original. The second deep theory concerns the relationship between the Simpson family and Springfield's institutional structure in a more specific way than the general economic analysis allows. Burns's deal with Grandpa Simpson, the exchange of Homer's guaranteed employment for Grandpa's insolence about Burns's crime, has been mentioned, but the implications extend further than individual protection. If Burns was willing to make that deal to silence Abe Simpson, then Burns has almost certainly made similar deals with other Springfield residents. The specific crime Abe witnessed has been described in vague terms in different episodes. It involves Burns doing something that would be deeply damaging to his reputation if revealed. The deal was made. Abe's silence was purchased with Homer's employment. Now extend this logic. Burns has been operating in Springfield for over a century. In that time, he has accumulated enormous power. Not just economic power, but the power of specific knowledge, of specific leverage over specific people. Burns knows things about Springfield's residents that those residents would not want known. His longevity gives him an extraordinary advantage. He has outlived most of the people who knew things about him, while he retains full knowledge of everything he has learned about everyone else. He is the institutional memory of Springfield. He knows where every body is buried, including the literal ones in the plant's basement. This creates a web of obligation that extends through the entire town. Wiggum's police force does not investigate the power plant not merely because of general incompetence, but because specific members of the force have specific reasons to avoid certain investigations. The town's politicians support Burns not merely because of campaign donations, but because Burns holds information they cannot afford to have become public. The doctors who've treated Springfield's residents for decades know what the radiation is doing to their patients. They also know who employs most of those patients, and whose pharmaceutical connections give them access to the treatments that keep certain specific people alive. Springfield is not simply a town with a corrupt billionaire. It is a town that has been organized over generations around the management of a single man's secrets and the maintenance of a single man's power. The corruption is not incidental. It is structural. It runs through every institution, every relationship, every transaction. And the man at the center of it has been alive long enough to make sure there is no single point at which the structure can be challenged without the entire thing coming down. This is the deep theory's dark heart. Springfield does not change because it cannot change, not because its residents have been cognitively impaired, though they have. Not because they are choosing comfortable denial, though they are, but because the system that holds Springfield in place is too comprehensive, too deep-rooted, too thoroughly embedded to be disrupted by any individual action or any single moment of clarity. The people who might have challenged it, Mona Simpson, who tried, were removed. The people who might have seen it clearly, Homer, when the crayon was removed, were made to feel that clarity was not worth its cost. The people who might have spoken, Grandpa, with his deal, were bought. Springfield is not just a town that forgot. It is a town that was made to forget by someone who understood that forgetting was the mechanism of his survival. The third deep theory is the one that sits at the absolute bottom of the iceberg, the coldest and quietest place, where the light is almost entirely gone. It concerns Maggie. We have discussed Maggie's intelligence. We have discussed her silence as strategy. We have considered the possibility that her genius is the radiation theory's flip side. Where Homer was diminished, she was amplified. We have considered the possibility that in the coma theory, her extraordinary abilities are Homer's dream projection of hope for his youngest child. But there is a fourth possibility. A possibility the show has never stated, but which the accumulated evidence points toward with a consistency that is difficult to dismiss. What if Maggie is not 1 year old? The floating timeline means that in 2025, Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s. Bart is still 10. Lisa is still 8. These are the rules of the floating timeline. But Maggie's situation is slightly different from the others. The others have been frozen at ages that correspond to the ages they were when the show began. Maggie has been frozen at the age of 1. Not 1 when the show began, but 1. An infant, the youngest possible version of personhood, the least developed, the most vulnerable. Why would the show freeze its youngest character at an age more extreme than the others? The narrative logic of the floating timeline does not require it. Bart's 10ness and Lisa's 8ness allow them to be schoolchildren, to have the kinds of adventures schoolchildren have, to exist in the social world of Springfield Elementary. These are practical narrative choices. Maggie at 1 is different. Maggie at 1 is not a practical narrative choice. It is a choice to keep one member of the family in a permanent state of pre-verbal, pre-ambulatory infancy. It is a choice to keep her dependent. It is a choice to keep her watched over rather than watching. Except that is not what the show actually shows. The show shows Maggie watching, always watching and understanding and acting with an intelligence that should not exist in a 1-year-old. The show has frozen her body at 1, while leaving her mind to develop unconstrained by the floating timeline. This creates a paradox. Maggie's body is that of an infant. Her mind is something else entirely. Something that has been developing, unchecked and unobserved, for 36 years behind the disguise of an infant who cannot speak. 36 years of watching. 36 years of listening. 36 years of absorbing the complete social, political, emotional, and institutional history of Springfield from the most invisible possible position. 36 years of understanding things that none of the adults around her understand, while none of those adults think to consider what she understands, because she is a baby, and babies do not understand things. What does Maggie know? She knows everything that has happened in that house since the beginning. She was present for every argument, every revelation, every moment of joy and grief, every conversation the adults believed was private, because she was just the baby in the corner. She was present when Homer learned about his mother. She was present during the Burns conspiracy discussions. She was present when the show revealed things about its own characters that the characters themselves did not fully process. She was always in the room. She was never suspected of understanding. The deep theory holds that Maggie Simpson is the most informed entity in Springfield. She has been building a complete picture of the town, its power structure, its secrets, its corruptions, its invisible architecture of leverage and silence for 36 years. She has done this from a position of perfect concealment. No one interrogates a baby. No one worries about what a baby knows. No one considers the possibility that the 1-year-old on the floor, sucking her pacifier, watching the room with those enormous eyes, is the most dangerous intelligence in the building. And the question that the theory does not answer because the show does not answer it, and perhaps cannot answer it, is what Maggie intends to do with what she knows. She has the information. She has the patience. 36 years of patience. Infinite patience. The patience of someone who has decided that the right moment has not yet arrived but will. She has demonstrated on the occasions when she has acted that she can act with precision and effectiveness, and a complete absence of hesitation. Springfield has been waiting for something to change for 36 years. Everything continues to reset. The loop continues to float. Burns continues to live. Homer continues to be oblivious. Lisa continues to ask questions no one answers. And Maggie continues to watch. The bottom of the iceberg is not the radiation theory, or the coma theory, or the who shot Burns debate. Those are the comfortable theories. The theories the show has acknowledged and engaged with. the theories that exist in relationship with the show's official text. The bottom of the iceberg is this. The most powerful being in Springfield has been watching from the most invisible possible position for longer than the show has been on the air, and the show has never told us what she is going to do. Maybe it never will. Maybe that is the show's final, best, most completely unresolvable mystery. Not what happened in Springfield, but what is about to. There is one more theory that belongs in this section, and it is the strangest one of all. It begins with a single question. Who is the show for? The obvious answer is that The Simpsons is for television audiences, for the families who watched it in the early 90s, for the generation that grew up with it, for the viewers who continue to tune in or stream it now. The show was created for entertainment, funded by advertising, distributed by a network whose interest was maximizing viewership and therefore revenue. This is the economic answer. It is correct as far as it goes. But there is a reading of The Simpsons, a reading that lives very near the bottom of the iceberg, in which the show's primary function, regardless of its economic context, has been to process something on behalf of its culture. Not to entertain its culture, not to critique its culture, but to metabolize it. To take the specific anxieties, contradictions, and unacknowledged truths of late 20th century and early 21st century American life, and convert them into a form that could be digested, episode by episode, year by year, without becoming intolerable. Every culture needs mechanisms for processing what it cannot confront directly. Ritual, religion, art, comedy. These are all, at some level, tools for converting the unbearable into the manageable. The Simpsons has functioned as one of these tools for 3 decades. The things the show has made jokes about: economic inequality, environmental destruction, institutional corruption, the failure of the education system, the abandonment of the elderly, the specific loneliness of the American working class, are things that American culture has not been able to address through direct political or social action. They are things that produce anxiety when confronted directly and relief when deflected through comedy. Springfield absorbs this anxiety. The show metabolizes it. Every episode in which Burns demonstrates that wealth insulates you from consequence is an episode in which the American audience processes its own helplessness in the face of concentrated economic power. Not by solving the problem, not by producing a plan for action, but by laughing at it and releasing some of the pressure. The laugh is the release valve. Springfield is the vessel. This is what the show is for, on the deepest level the iceberg contains. It is a cultural processing mechanism, a 36-year apparatus for converting the specific anguish of the American condition into something livable. Not something solved, not something transcended. Just something you can sit with on a Sunday night, on the couch, in the company of a family that is always there, in a town that is always lit, in a loop that never ends. That is the bottom of the iceberg. That is the last theory. That is what the whole architecture points to, when you follow every thread down to the place where they converge. Springfield metabolizes America. It has been doing this for 36 years, and it will keep doing it. Because the things it metabolizes have not gone away. They have not been solved or transcended or even adequately acknowledged. They are still there, producing the anxiety that the show continues to absorb, releasing the pressure that the show continues to manage, feeding the loop that the show continues to maintain. Springfield is not a cartoon town. It is a cultural organ, and it keeps beating because we keep needing it to. Section 11. The closing descent, everything connects. We began this descent somewhere near the surface, in the place where the light still reaches and the water is warm enough to be comfortable. We started with what everyone knows, the show that never ends, the family that never ages, the nuclear power plant that provides the town's electricity and its most persistent jokes. We started with the things you can see from the shore. Then we went deeper. We went into the radiation theory, which began as a joke about a three-eyed fish and ended as a systematic account of how a billionaire uses environmental contamination as a tool of social control. We went into the coma theory, which began as an observation about a tonal shift in Season 4 and ended as the most emotionally devastating reading the show's structure will support. Homer, asleep since 1993, dreaming his family into permanent safety while the world outside his hospital room ages without him. We reopened the question of who shot Burns, and we found that the answer the show gave us, the neat, convenient, legally unchallengeable answer of a baby who cannot be prosecuted, was too neat, too convenient, too carefully structured around the fact of its own unprosecutability to be fully satisfying. We considered Burns's immortality, and found it to be not a cartoon premise but the logical conclusion of what happens when unlimited wealth is, directed entirely at the project of extending a single human life. We watched Springfield collectively vote to make truth illegal and exile the man who carried it. And we recognized in that episode something true about how communities actually maintain impossible fictions. We looked at Maggie and found something extraordinary hiding in plain sight. We counted the predictions that came true and understood that the show's prophetic reputation is less about prophecy and more about what it means to be paying very close attention for a very long time. We traced Mona Simpson's exile and found in the wreckage of one woman's radical act the explanation for 3 generations of damage done to a single family by a single man's grudge. We searched for Springfield on a map and found it everywhere. In every city that has been built around a single employer's interests, in every community that chose comfortable forgetting over the harder work of acknowledgement. And then we went further down, into the dark, into the iceberg's colder regions where the theories the show did not invite still form, where the accumulated weight of 36 years of storytelling generates meaning without anyone intending it. We found the food supply. We found the school. We found the retirement home and the church and the police force and the web of obligation that runs through every institution. In Springfield, the web that Burns has been weaving for over a century, the web so thoroughly embedded in the town's fabric that pulling any thread risks unraveling the whole thing. We found Maggie, still watching, still silent, still waiting. And we found the thing at the very bottom, the thing that is not a theory about the show, but a theory about what the show is for. Springfield as cultural processor, Springfield as release valve, Springfield as the vessel that holds America's anxiety so that America can exhale on Sunday nights and go to bed, believing the thing it needs to believe, that the family will be fine, that the loop will continue, that Homer will make it back to the couch. Now we surface, slowly. Because this kind of descent requires a slow return. What do we bring back with us? The first thing is this. The Simpsons is not, despite everything, a depressing show. This might seem like an extraordinary claim given everything we have just explored. We have spent hours in the show's darkest implications, in its radiation, and its coma dreams, and its institutional corruption, and its quietly devastating portraits of wasted lives and managed grief. None of that was false. All of it is genuinely there, genuinely supported by the show's text, genuinely part of what makes Springfield what it is. And yet, Homer makes it home by the end of every episode. Not because nothing bad happened. Things happen to Homer that would destroy a real person, physically, emotionally, existentially. He makes it home because home is the thing the show has decided to protect. Home is the one thing in Springfield that the radiation cannot reach, that the coma cannot contaminate, that Burns cannot purchase, that the floating timeline cannot dissolve. Home is Marge at the kitchen counter. Home is Bart and Lisa arguing about something that will be forgotten by the next episode. Home is Maggie in the playpen, watching everything, keeping her counsel. Home is the sound of the television, and the smell of whatever Homer has convinced himself is a reasonable dinner. Home is the couch. The couch gag, which opens every episode, is the show's most persistent joke and its most persistent statement. Every week, the family runs into the living room and lands on the couch in some variation of the same sequence. Sometimes the couch devours them. Sometimes they arrive as skeletons. Sometimes they are painted by Michelangelo. Sometimes the sequence takes longer than the episode deserves. But they always land on the couch. The family always assembles. The opening always completes. This is the show's thesis, stated every week without words. Whatever happened, whatever comes next, however strange and dark and contaminated Springfield is beneath its surface. The family lands on the couch. They are together. The episode can begin. The second thing we bring back is something about time. The show's 36 years are an extraordinary fact. Television is not a medium designed for this kind of duration. Shows end. Casts age. Cultural moments pass. The conditions that produced a given show eventually change beyond the show's ability to adapt to them. The Simpsons has outlasted all of this. It has outlasted the network television era that produced it. It has outlasted the careers of many of the people who built it. It has outlasted specific cultural moments and political eras and technological revolutions that should have made it obsolete. It has not become obsolete. It has become something stranger and more interesting, a living document. 36 years of episodes constitute a record of the American imagination across 3.5 decades. Its fears, its hopes, comic deflections, its quiet griefs, its indestructible tendency to find the joke in even the most serious things. The show is an archive. When historians generations from now want to understand what it felt like to be an American in the late 20th and early 21st century, Not the political history, not the economic data, but the texture of daily life. The things ordinary people worried about and laughed at, and could not quite face directly. The Simpsons will be one of their most important documents. The floating timeline, which we have spent so much time examining, is the mechanism by which the show performs its documentary function. Because the characters never age, because the present is always the present, the show can absorb each successive cultural moment without having to explain how the characters have changed. Homer in 2025 carries no explicit memory of Homer in 1995. But the show does, the archive does. The 36 years of episodes carry everything, and everything they carry is part of the document. The third thing we bring back is something about family. The Simpson family is a mess. They are, by most objective measures, a dysfunction. A father who sleeps at his workstation at a nuclear plant, a mother who suppresses her identity in service of domestic order, a son who has been on the edge of expulsion since he was 10, a daughter who is too intelligent for her environment and cannot stop saying so, baby who is either an infant or the most dangerous intelligence in Springfield, depending on which theory you find most compelling. They argue. They hurt each other. They fail each other in recurring, predictable ways that the show has documented exhaustively. They also love each other. This is not a small thing. The love in the Simpson family is not the tidy, aspirational love of the television families that preceded them, not the Cleavers, not the Bradys, not the Huxtables. It is messy and inconsistent and frequently expressed through the wrong actions at the wrong times. Homer strangles Bart, but Homer also works a second job to buy his daughter a pony. Marge does not speak honestly about her own desires, but Marge is also the person who stays, who maintains the structure, who provides the stability that allows the family to continue functioning as a family despite everything that works against it. Bart destroys and provokes and refuses to engage with anything that might cost him emotional vulnerability. But Bart also, when Lisa is hurting, finds ways to help that he would deny if you asked him about them directly. The love in the Simpson family is the love of people who are imperfect in their loving, but cannot stop. It is ordinary love, the kind that is not heroic or cinematic or particularly eloquent, but that persists anyway, through the strangling and the suppression and the refusal and the damage. This is the kind of love that most people who have families actually experience. Not the love from movies. The love that is sometimes expressed as irritation, and sometimes as effort, and sometimes as a father, covering a cruel sign with photographs of his daughter so that what he sees every day is not his defeat but her face. The Simpsons has been telling this story for 36 years. Through all the theories, all the darkness, all the radiation, and the coma dreams, and the institutional corruption, and the immortal billionaire. Story it has been telling, underneath everything, is about a family that cannot stop loving each other even when they are trying to. That is the stories the iceberg protects. The cold and the dark and the impossible theories are the depth charge that makes the warmth meaningful. You cannot feel the light from the surface until you understand how much water sits between you and it. And now, finally, the last thing we bring back, you. If you have been listening to this for as long as we have been descending, then Springfield is not foreign to you. The show you have been examining is a show you have spent real time with. The characters whose hidden lives we have been tracing are characters you have carried, in some form, since you first encountered them. As a child, maybe, or as a teenager, or as a tired adult who turned on the television because the world was heavy and Springfield was lit, and the couch was waiting. The reason the theories work, the reason they resonate, the reason people build them and share them and develop them over years and decades, is not that The Simpsons is a puzzle to be solved. It is that Springfield is a place people have cared about enough to look at carefully. The theories are acts of attention. They are the evidence that viewers gave the show more than their passive presence. They gave it thought. They gave it analysis. They gave it the most valuable thing an audience can give a piece of art, which is the willingness to take it seriously enough to really see it. And what they found, when they looked carefully, is what we have been exploring. A show that is richer and stranger and more honest about human life than it was ever required to be. A show that hid its most serious content inside its comedy so skillfully that millions of people absorbed it without ever quite knowing they had. A show that made a family that is both entirely fictional and somehow more familiar than fiction usually manages. A town that cannot be located on any map, but that most people can find their way home to. There is a school of thought, articulated by certain literary critics, that the best long-form fiction produces what they call a secondary world. A place with enough internal, consistency, and enough emotional truth that the audience's imagination can actually inhabit it. Middle-earth. Yoknapatawpha County, Hogwarts, Macondo. These are places that exist nowhere on Earth, but that feel, to the people who have spent time in them, more real than some places they have actually visited. The details are too specific. The history is too layered. The characters are too fully formed. You cannot simply call these places fictional and feel that the word is adequate. Springfield is one of these places. It has been built out of more material than almost any other secondary world in the history of popular culture. Nearly 800 episodes, hundreds of named characters, 36 years of accumulated detail. You could map Springfield, and people have tried, though the map shifts with each episode you add. You could write its history, though the history contradicts itself. You could analyze its social structure, its economy, its religious life, its relationship with the natural world, the specific way its institutional culture both enables and prevents accountability. You could spend a very long time, 2 hours, say, or many hours, or a lifetime of Sunday nights, in Springfield, and you would not exhaust what it contains. This is the final mystery of The Simpsons. The one that sits not at the bottom of the iceberg but above everything. In the air, in the light. How did a cartoon about a stupid, loud, yellow family in an impossible American town become a place this rich? How did something this durable and this full of life get made, and then kept alive and then kept returning to? The answer is probably something simple. That the show, from the beginning, took its characters seriously. Not their circumstances, not their setting, but them, as entities capable of feeling things that matter and wanting things that are real. That the writers, whatever their educational credentials and satirical intentions, loved the Simpson family. That the audience, whatever their reasons for returning week after week, loved the Simpson family too. Love is the mechanism. Love is what built Springfield. Love is what keeps it standing despite everything the iceberg contains. Love is what turns a man covering a cruel sign with his daughters' photographs into something you remember decades later. Love is what makes a dying woman's last scene with her son genuinely sad in a show that has made you laugh for 30 years. Love is what makes the couch gag complete every week. The family assembling together, ready for whatever comes next. Homer is still at the plant. Marge is still at the counter. Bart is still on the skateboard. Lisa is still playing the saxophone. Maggie is still watching. And somewhere, maybe in a hospital bed in Springfield General, maybe in a world that is simply the world, a man is dreaming about his family. He has been dreaming for a very long time. He is not ready to stop. He is not sure the dream will let him stop. He is not sure he would want it to. The dream continues. Springfield is still there. The porch light is on. Come inside. The couch is warm. The television is on. Something is already beginning. Expanded section. The world Burns built. A deeper examination of Charles Montgomery Burns. To understand Springfield, you have to understand Burns, not as a punchline, not as a cartoon archetype of capitalist villainy, as a system. Because Burns is not simply a character in The Simpsons. He is the condition that makes Springfield possible and the force that makes it permanent. Every theory we have examined connects back to Burns. The radiation connects to Burns. The institutional corruption connects to Burns. Mona Simpson's exile connects to Burns. Homer's crayon, in the theory that the medical establishment in Springfield is compromised by Burns's influence, connects to Burns. He is the attractor around which Springfield's entire social and economic reality organizes itself, and he has been organizing it, actively and deliberately, for over a century. Let us spend real time with him. Charles Montgomery Plantagenet Schicklgruber Burns. The name alone is a document. The middle name Plantagenet connects him to the English royal dynasty that ruled from 1154 to 1485, a dynasty characterized by extraordinary dynastic violence, consolidation of power, and the belief that wealth was not earned but inherited, that the hierarchies of fortune and birth were natural and appropriate, rather than contingent and challengeable. The surname Burns is ordinary, Anglo-Saxon, the kind of name that could belong to anyone. The combination is precise, the grandiose pretension of aristocratic self-conception attached to the superficial form of democratic approachability. Burns presents as a man. He is, in his self-conception, something older. The show has established his birth year in the vicinity of 1886. This is not always consistent. Like everything in Springfield, the specific details shift, but the general period has been confirmed in multiple episodes. It places his childhood in the Gilded Age, that extraordinary era of American capitalism in which the rules of the modern economy were being established, and the men who established them were accumulating wealth at rates and through methods that later generations would find difficult to comprehend. Carnegie, Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Morgan. These were Burns's contemporaries. The world he was born into was one in which the constraints on capitalist accumulation were minimal, and the possibilities for individual enrichment were effectively unlimited if you were positioned correctly and had sufficient ruthlessness. Burns was positioned correctly. The Burns family, as the show has established through flashbacks and historical references, was already wealthy before Charles was born. Old wealth, the kind that predates industrialization, the kind whose origins are lost in the conveniently unexamined past. By the time Charles reached adulthood and began managing the family's holdings, he was starting from a position of enormous advantage. He did not build from nothing. He extended and concentrated what was already there. What he added was the ruthlessness, and the intelligence, and the extraordinary, almost inhuman willingness to subordinate every other consideration: personal comfort, social approval, emotional connection, moral restraint, to the single goal of accumulation and the maintenance of the power that accumulation provides. Burns attended Yale. The show has established this, and the show has also established what Burns's Yale years produced. Not the typical patrician's education and the responsibilities of stewardship, not the Ivy League idealism that sends young men into public service with a genuine desire to do something with their advantages. Burns went to Yale and learned that the world was organized in his favor and that the organization of the world in his favor was correct and appropriate and should be maintained by any means necessary. He came back from Yale the same man who had arrived there, only with better credentials and a broader understanding of how power actually worked. The nuclear power plant represents a specific moment in Burns's evolution. Before the plant, Burns's wealth was the accumulated wealth of the Gilded Age: property, finance, the old forms of capitalist power. The plant represents his engagement with the industrial 20th century, with the specific form of power that nuclear energy made available. It is not accidental that Burns chose nuclear power rather than any other energy source. Nuclear power is the form of energy production that most directly resembles Burns's own relationship with the world. Enormous power, concentrated in a single facility, controlled by a single man, with costs that are distributed across the entire surrounding population while the benefits flow upward. Nuclear power is Burns's philosophy made literal. The plant's 342 safety violations are not negligence. They've been established already as strategy. But it is worth dwelling on the specific nature of this strategy, because it is not simple. Burns is not simply choosing profit over safety, as the cartoon villain would. Burns is making a calculation about what his continued economic and social dominance requires. Safety violations can be addressed. The cost of addressing them is quantifiable. Burns has calculated that the cost of addressing them exceeds the cost of maintaining them, not just in financial terms, but in terms of what acknowledgement would require. To fix the violations would be to acknowledge they exist. Acknowledge they exist would be to acknowledge what they have already done to the population of Springfield. To acknowledge what they have done would be to create a legal and moral liability that even Burns's resources might struggle to contain. The violations are maintained not out of greed, but out of a logical calculus that greed has produced. Burns is not a man who cuts corners because he is cheap. He is a man who has determined that the cheapest available option is also the most strategically defensible one, and that option is to continue as he has been continuing, to allow the violations to persist, maintain Homer Simpson at the safety inspector's desk, and to trust that Springfield's combination of cognitive impairment, institutional capture, and learned helplessness will continue to prevent accountability. This calculation has been correct for over a century. Springfield has never successfully held Burns accountable for anything. The shooting of Burns by Maggie, or Homer, or Marge, depending on your theory, is the closest the show has come to depicting consequential action against Burns, and even that event was insufficient to alter his position. He was shot, he recovered, he returned to the plant. The investigation focused elsewhere. The town moved on. Burns's power was not diminished by the bullet. The bullet did not touch the system. It touched the man briefly, and the man is not the system. This is the deepest truth about Burns. He has made himself replaceable by making himself irreplaceable. This sounds paradoxical. What it means is that Burns has so thoroughly embedded himself in Springfield's economic structure that the town cannot function without him, which means any attempt to challenge him is also an attempt to challenge the basis of the town's own economic survival. You cannot remove Burns without removing the power plant. You cannot remove the power plant without collapsing the town's economic base. You cannot collapse the town's economic base without causing suffering to every resident of Springfield. The very residents whose suffering Burns has been causing through other means for decades. The town is trapped in a relationship with its most destructive element because the relationship has constructed, deliberately and over time, to be inescapable. There are moments in the show when Burns is shown in contexts that complicate the cartoon villainy. There is the episode where Burns retrieves a teddy bear he lost as a child, a small, threadbare toy that is the only visible remnant of whatever Burns was before he became what he is. The episode treats this with unexpected gentleness. The bear represents, apparently, the last moment in Burns's history when he wanted something that was not power. The moment, before accumulation, became his dominant mode. Whatever childhood Burns had, whatever warmth or innocence it contained, is preserved in that bear, and the episode's conclusion, in which Burns is re-separated from the bear, is played as something closer to sad than funny. What are we to make of this? The show insists, occasionally, on Burns's humanity, on the vestigial human being that exists somewhere inside the century of accumulated damage. It does not do this to excuse him. It does it because it is honest. People who cause the scale of harm Burns has caused are not born capable of that harm. They are made. The making takes a long time and requires a specific set of conditions. Conditions that the Gilded Age provided in abundance, but it is always a process rather than an origin. Burns was not always this. He became this. And the bear is the show's quiet acknowledgement that something was present, once before the becoming. But the acknowledgement does not change anything. Burns's humanity, to the extent it persists, is not sufficient to alter what he has built. The system does not care about the teddy bear. The system does not care about Burns's feelings. The system cares about the continuation of itself, and it will continue as long as Burns maintains the conditions that allow it to. Burns's relationship with Smithers is the system's most intimate expression. We have discussed Smithers elsewhere, his functional role as Burns's medical caretaker, his emotional role as Burns's only genuine attachment, the power dynamic that sits underneath what the show has sometimes played as unrequited love. But there is a further dimension worth examining. Smithers is, within Springfield's social structure, an intelligent and capable person who has chosen to spend his career in total subordination to a man who is his moral and human inferior. This choice, and the show has established it as a choice, not a requirement, is not explained simply by devotion or by the particular nature of Smithers's feelings for Burns. It is explained more fully by what Smithers gets from the arrangement. What Smithers gets is purpose. He is necessary, not in the small, replaceable way that any employee is necessary, but in the specific, non-delegable way that only he, with his specific knowledge of Burns's medical protocol and his specific familiarity with Burns's requirements, can fulfill. Without Smithers, Burns dies within a week. This is a form of power, not the power of wealth or institutional authority. Smithers has none of his own, but the power of indispensability. The power of being the one person in the world who possesses the specific combination of knowledge and proximity and competence that a particular and enormously powerful man requires to survive. Smithers is essential, and for a person who might otherwise feel as dispensable as most people feel, as Homer feels, as Barney feels, as the residents of the retirement home feel, essential is enough. This is a portrait of codependency in its purest form. Two people who maintain each other's worst tendencies, each giving the other something they cannot get elsewhere, each preventing the other from facing what their life would look like without the arrangement. Burns, without Smithers, is a dying man. Smithers, without Burns, is a person of considerable competence and intelligence, with no context in which to apply them. The arrangement persists because its termination would be worse for both parties than its continuation. This is not love. It is not servitude. It is the specific, uncomfortable, all too human dynamic of a mutually beneficial dependency that neither party can afford to examine too closely. And so Burns lives. Year after year, episode after episode, shooting after shooting, collapse after collapse, he lives. He glows in the dark after his treatments. He walks through the woods like a creature from another world. He squints into the distance, at the town whose water he has been poisoning and whose children he has been indirectly harming for decades. And he cannot remember the name of his most important employee. And his diseases are in perfect equilibrium. And Smithers has remembered his 3 o'clock, and the plant is running, and the power is on, and Springfield is lit. He will outlive the show. He has already outlived most of the people who built it. He is, within the logic of his own world, genuinely immortal, not in the sense of supernatural invulnerability, but in the sense of a system that has made adequate provision for its own. Continuation. As long as the treatments arrive on schedule. As long as Smithers is there. As long as he continues to consume the electricity the plant produces. As long as Homer is at his workstation in Sector 7G. As long as the people of Springfield cannot quite bring themselves to look too carefully at the cracked cooling towers. As long as they can find it in themselves to forget, one more time, what they almost remembered. Burns endures because forgetting endures. This is the simplest and most complete explanation of his immortality. He is kept alive not by medical treatments alone, not by wealth alone, but by the town's extraordinary, practiced, almost heroic capacity for not knowing what it knows. Expanded section. Homer and Marge, the marriage at the center of everything. There is a version of this analysis that has been circling throughout everything we have discussed, without quite landing on its most important subject. The radiation, the coma, the institutional corruption, the floating timeline. All of these are the architecture of Springfield. But the heart of the show, the thing that has made people return to it across 36 years, is not any of this. The heart is Homer and Marge. This is an obvious thing to say. It is also true in ways that resist being obvious. Homer and Marge Simpson are the longest-running romantic partnership in the history of American television. They have been together, in various animated forms, since the show's premiere in 1989. They have stayed together through circumstances that, in a show operating on realistic emotional dynamics, would have produced divorce multiple times over. Homer's various infidelities of attention, if not of action. Marge's periodic acknowledgement that the life she is living is not the life she imagined. The specific, grinding, particular way that Homer's incapacity for self-awareness creates problems that Marge is left to solve. The way Marge's self-suppression creates a silence that Homer cannot hear and therefore cannot respond to. These are real strains. The show has depicted them with real care, and yet, the marriage holds. Not because the show requires it to. There have been episodes in which the possibility of dissolution was serious enough to feel genuinely threatening. Not because Marge is too passive to leave. Not because Homer is incapable of change. The show has shown us the Homer who can change, who exists when the crayon is removed, who is capable of genuine tenderness and attention when he is not being driven by appetite. The marriage holds because something between these two specific people is real in a way that the show treats, finally, as inviolable. There is a theory among the show's more emotionally attentive fans that the key to understanding Homer and Marge is not their differences, but their specific, carefully constructed compatibility. Homer's obliviousness and Marge's orderliness are not simply a comedic contrast. They are, the theory holds, a functional division of emotional labor that makes both of them more capable, together, than either would be alone. Homer is overwhelmed by the world, his low IQ, his emotionally reactive nature, his inability to maintain extended strategic thinking. All of this means that he processes experience as a series of immediate moments without much ability to construct a narrative across them. He cannot plan. He cannot anticipate. He cannot hold more than one or two things in his consciousness at a time. What this means, in a marriage, is that he is incapable of the kind of long-term dissatisfaction that destroys marriages. He cannot nurse a grievance for years. He cannot construct a systematic analysis of what is wrong with the relationship and develop a case for departure. He forgets. He resets. Each morning is, for Homer, substantially a new morning. Marge holds the continuity, carries the marriage history, the good moments and the failures, the promises and the ways they have been broken, the long pattern of what Homer is and what he cannot be. She is the memory of the relationship. She is the person who knows in detail what has happened across the years and what it means. This is a burden. It is also a gift of a particular kind. Marge can choose each day what weight to give to the accumulated history she carries. She can choose to see the pattern of failure, or she can choose to see the moments that interrupt it. She mostly chooses the latter. This is not naivety. It is a decision that she makes, with full information, over and over. The marriage works because Homer provides Marge with something she cannot provide herself, the experience of being unconditionally wanted. Homer's love for Marge is not sophisticated. It is not qualified or complicated by strategic thinking or long-term assessment of mutual compatibility. Homer loves Marge in the way he loves donuts, with the whole body, without reservation, without the kind of intellectual distance that makes love feel safe, but also smaller. He does not approach Marge from a controlled distance. He enters the space between them completely, and he stays there, and he comes back, and he wants her every time. This is what Marge's intelligence and self-suppression have cost her elsewhere. The experience of being simply, fully wanted. Her friends cannot offer this. Springfield cannot offer this. Her own family of origin, as the show has occasionally depicted, did not offer this. Homer, despite everything, offers this, and his offering is real. It is one of the few entirely authentic things in Springfield. And what Homer gets from Marge is the experience of being held, not controlled. Homer is too chaotic to be controlled, and the show has wisely resisted making Marge a controlling figure despite her organizational instincts. Held in the sense of contained. Homer's chaos requires a container that is strong enough to absorb it without being destroyed. The container Marge provides is made of patience and genuine affection and the specific kind of care that shows up in small, sustained gestures, the meals that are ready, the house that is maintained, the crises that are managed before they reach Homer's awareness. Homer is able to be as fully himself as he is, partly because Marge has made the space around him safe enough to contain it. He is held. He knows he is held, even if he cannot articulate the knowledge. This is, stripped of its cartoon form, a recognizable portrait of a real kind of marriage. Not the marriage of the movies, which tends to be about falling in love and the obstacles to its consummation. Not the marriage of romantic comedy which ends at the altar, but the ongoing, daily, renewed, and re-established marriage that most adults who have been married for a long time actually inhabit. The marriage of permanent imperfection, of the same argument returning in slightly different forms, of the same strengths and limitations recurring across years, of choosing, repeatedly, to find the whole thing worth continuing. The show has given this marriage genuine tests. The episode where Homer discovers Marge's letters to an old flame, letters that suggest she wonders, sometimes, about the road not taken. The episode where Marge goes back to college and is briefly captivated by the world that her early marriage closed off. The episode where Homer meets a woman at work who is everything Marge is not, effortlessly understanding, apparently unconstrained by domestic responsibility, and is briefly drawn toward the possibility of being understood without effort. These tests are played with real tension because the show commits to them seriously enough that the outcome is not predetermined. Homer could leave. Marge could leave. The choice to stay is not written into the show's premise as a permanent requirement. Or if it is, the show has the skill to make the constraint feel like a choice. And when the choice is made, when the marriage reasserts itself, it carries the weight of having been genuinely threatened. The reassertion is not default. It is decision. The most moving versions of Homer and Marge's marriage are the quietest ones. Not the grand gestures, the pony, the famous bowling alley sacrifice, the various elaborate demonstrations of affection that the show stages periodically as evidence that Homer is capable of caring. The quiet ones. The moment in an early season when Homer says, without setup or punchline, that everything he has ever done has been for Marge, and the moment is allowed to simply be true. The moment in the episode about their early relationship when a young Homer hears a song that makes him think of Marge in the song. Actually, the song Groaning chose, Eyes Wide, by the band Earth, plays over the image of Homer's face in a way that makes something unbearably tender briefly visible. The moment when Marge, in an episode whose main plot is something else entirely, simply reaches for Homer's hand in a crowd, and he takes it. The marriage is the show's true argument. Not the satire, not the predictions, not the theories we have been building and extending throughout this descent. The argument the show is actually making is this: that ordinary life, with its ordinary love and its ordinary failures and its ordinary tendency to choose the familiar over the possibly better unfamiliar, is enough. That a man like Homer, who is damaged and oblivious and sometimes selfish and cognitively impaired by a combination of radiation and a crayon and the specific weight of a childhood without his mother, can still be a good husband in the ways that matter. That a woman like Marge, who suppresses her own desires and carries the emotional weight of the family, and maintains the structure that makes everyone else's chaos possible, is not a figure of tragedy but of quiet power. That their children, chaotic, brilliant, silent, each navigating Springfield in their own way, are, in the deepest sense the word allows, loved. The show has been making this argument for 36 years. It has been making it through the satire, and the darkness, and the radiation, and the coma theories, and the floating timeline, and the institutional corruption. It has been making it every time Homer makes it back to the couch. Every time Marge is at the counter when he arrives. Every time the family assembles, with all its imperfections, and the episode begins, and the story is told one more time. This is the argument. Not that Springfield is good, it is demonstrably not good. Not that the system is just, it is demonstrably unjust. Not that the future is bright, The future of Springfield, examined carefully, is not bright, but that in the middle of the contaminated water, and the corrupt power plant, and the frozen timeline, and the billionaire who will not die, specific people found each other, and stayed and made something. A family, a home, a life that is recognizably theirs, and that this making, imperfect as it is what it looks like when love does not give up. This is the argument The Simpsons has been making for 36 years, and it is the most complicated and most human argument of all of them. Expanded section. Grandpa Simpson and the weight of forgetting Abraham Simpson. Grandpa occupies a peculiar position in the show's emotional landscape. He is comic in the way that the show's best comedy works, generated by specificity, by the particular flavor of his particular unreliability, by the rambling non-sequiturs that begin in one decade and end in another, by the gap between what he intends to communicate and what actually emerges from his mouth. He is also, when the show chooses to remember it, one of its saddest characters. Grandpa Simpson lived a life. This is a fact that the comedy sometimes obscures, but the show has periodically forced the audience to confront. He served in World War II. He has photographs. He has stories, even if the stories wander. He was young once, in a way the floating timeline makes permanently inaccessible. Not young in the way that Bart and Lisa are frozen young, but young in the specific, historical, now concluded way of someone who was alive in the 20th century, and is now in the first, carrying all of it. His relationship with Homer is one of the show's ongoing griefs. Abe was not a good father. The show has established this in enough episodes that it constitutes a consistent picture. A man whose emotional unavailability in Homer's childhood left Homer with wounds that shaped everything about who he became. The maternal absence that Abe sustained through deception, hiding Mona's survival from Homer for decades, is the most deliberate of Abe's failures. But it is not the only one. The ordinary failures of fatherhood, the insufficient attention, the inadequate expression of love, the ways a father can be physically present and emotionally absent. These are also part of the picture. What makes this interesting, rather than simply sad, is the show's insistence on Abe's complexity. He was not a malicious father, he was a limited one. He had his own wounds, his own father, his own era, his own way of moving through the world that was the product of conditions he did not choose. The World War II generation, which the show depicts through Abe and his contemporaries, was not a generation known for its emotional expressiveness. They survived things. They did not typically process them. The survival was the achievement. The emotional aftermath was someone else's problem, in a later era, when the concept of emotional aftermath became available. Abe covered up Mona's existence because, the show suggests, without stating it directly, the truth was too complicated to explain and too painful to inhabit. He told Homer she was dead because the alternative, the truth, required a narrative he did not know how to provide. He was a man who dealt with difficulty through elimination, rather than engagement. He eliminated the problem of Mona by making her die, in Homer's understanding, and moved on. The cost of this elimination was Homer's entire understanding of himself, was the motherless boy, the unloved child, the persistent conviction that there was something wrong with him that made people leave. The cost was enormous. Abe did not fully reckon with the cost, or if he did not say so in terms Homer could hear. The retirement home is where this story ends, or continues to end perpetually. Abe is deposited there. Homer visits when he remembers, which is not always. The staff ranges from indifferent to actively cruel. The other residents are people with their own histories, people who also lived lives, who also have stories, who are also in the process of being managed into a diminishment that makes their continued existence less demanding on the world around them. There is an episode in which Abe falls in love, genuinely, not comedically, falls in love with a woman at the retirement home, a woman who sees him and is seen by him in the specific way that two people who have both lived a long time can see each other. The episode is played with real tenderness. The romance is brief. The show cannot sustain it, for various plot reasons, but while it exists, it gives Abe a fullness that his ordinary episodes rarely grant him. He is not simply the rambling old man. He is a person with the capacity for feeling, still after all of it. This is what Grandpa carries, that the rest of Springfield cannot carry. Temporal depth. He has actual history. He has been in the world long enough to have a past that the floating timeline cannot erase, because his past predates the floating timeline's operation. Burns has this quality too, but Burns uses his historical depth as a weapon. Abe simply carries it, mostly in silence, occasionally releasing it in fragments that his audience cannot follow. The stories Abe tells that go nowhere are the show's portrait of what happens when memory exceeds the capacity of communication. He has things to say. He cannot always find the words, or the words that arrive are not the words that will convey what he means to people who did not live what he lived. This is the specific tragedy of aging in a culture that is always moving forward. The people who have the most to say are increasingly unable to say it in terms the present can receive. Abe is still there, in the retirement home, still telling stories, still reaching for something that the comedy cannot quite reach back for, still carrying, inside the rambling and the non sequiturs, the weight of a long life that has never been fully witnessed. Expanded section. The Lisa problem. What intelligence costs in Springfield we return, near the end of this descent to Lisa. Because Lisa is the character who most directly embodies the question the show has been circling for 36 years. What do you do with the truth in a place that cannot afford to hear it? Lisa is 8 years old. She has been 8 years old for 36 years. In that time, she has fought every battle available to an 8-year-old in Springfield, for the environment, for animal rights, for gender equity, for the acknowledgement of uncomfortable historical truths, for the school's music program, for the validity of her own intelligence against a community that finds intelligence inconvenient. She has fought all of these battles. She has won some of them temporarily. She has lost most of them, or won them in ways that the reset erases before the next episode. The show has been honest about the cost of this. Lisa is not simply the idealistic child who believes change is possible. She is the idealistic child who has seen, repeatedly, that change in Springfield is not simply difficult, but structurally prevented. The town that voted to keep the imposter principle, rather than acknowledge the truth. The town that forgot the dome. The town that saw Blinky, the three-eyed fish on national television, and forgot about it by the following week. Lisa has watched all of this. She keeps arguing anyway. Why? The answer the show gives across its best episodes is that Lisa argues because she cannot stop. It is not optimism. Lisa is too intelligent for unqualified optimism by season 4. It is something more like compulsion. The inability to see a wrong and remain silent about it, regardless of whether the speaking will produce change. This is not always admirable. The show has been willing to show the moments when Lisa's commitment to her principles produces outcomes that are harmful. The self-righteousness that isolates her, the refusal to compromise that makes her enemies where she could have made allies, the way that being right all the time prevents her from being in relationship with people who are wrong in the ordinary human ways. But the show has also always known that Lisa is right. Her environmental arguments are correct. Her musical talent is real. Her assessment of Springfield's failures is accurate. The show does not give her the comfortable resolution of being wrong and learning. It gives her the harder resolution of being right in a world that punishes rightness and having to decide whether to continue anyway. There is a theory, not widely discussed, that Lisa Simpson is the character most damaged by the floating timeline. Bart's 10ness is comfortable enough for him. He likes being 10, in the broad way that the show constructs his character. Homer's middle age is where his character lives. Marge's patience is not age-specific in the way that matters. But Lisa at 8 is a child who has been doing the intellectual and emotional work of an adult for 36 years, in a body and a social position that denies her the authority that work would command in an adult. She has been making arguments that would be respected if they came from a grown woman. They come from an 8-year-old, and Springfield, and the show, cannot grant them the weight they would otherwise carry. The flash-forward episodes, in which we see Lisa as a young woman, are the show briefly releasing her from this cage. Adult Lisa is the Lisa who exists if the floating timeline stops. A woman of serious intelligence, genuine achievement, complex feeling, navigating the world on terms that her intelligence and her character deserve. She is, in these episodes, more fully herself than she can be at 8. The flash-forwards are not simply speculation about the future. They are the show's acknowledgement that 8-year-old Lisa is a compressed and constrained version of a person who, given time, would be extraordinary. The show cannot give her that time. The floating timeline prevents it. And so, Lisa remains at 8, remains the smallest version of herself, remains the child whose best arguments are heard as precociousness, and whose most accurate observations are dismissed as the protests of someone who does not understand how the world works. She understands how the world works. She has understood how it works for 36 years. She simply cannot get anyone to listen. This is the Lisa problem. Not that she is wrong. She is not wrong. Not that she cannot argue effectively. She can argue more effectively than anyone in Springfield. The problem is that the world she is arguing within is not organized around the recognition of argument. It is organized around comfort. And comfort, in Springfield, requires not hearing what Lisa is saying. The question the show is never resolved, cannot resolve, without ending, is what Lisa does with this. She keeps arguing. She keeps playing the saxophone in her room, sending music up through the house to whoever might hear it. She keeps asking the questions that nobody answers. She keeps being, at 8 years old, the person the show most respects and least rewards. Maybe that is its own kind of answer. Maybe the show's unwillingness to resolve Lisa, to give her the victory her arguments deserve, or the defeat that would let her stop, is its most honest statement about what intelligence costs in a world like Springfield. It costs everything except itself. She loses the argument and retains the truth. She fails to change the world and does not stop trying to change it. She is isolated by her gifts and does not surrender them. This is not a happy ending. It is not exactly a sad one either. It is just Lisa at 8, in her room, with her saxophone in Springfield, as close to free as Springfield allows anyone to be. Expanded section. The episodic structure as philosophy. Why nothing sticks. In Springfield, there is a philosophical concept sometimes called eternal recurrence, the idea that all events in the universe will, given infinite time, repeat themselves exactly as they have occurred before. The concept predates Nietzsche, who made it famous, but Nietzsche's version is the most useful for our purposes. He asked what it would mean to live as if every moment of your life would be repeated infinitely. Would you live differently? Would the knowledge that everything recurs change how you inhabit your choices? Springfield is a place of eternal recurrence. Not in the cosmic sense, not quite, but in the structural sense that the show's episodic format creates. Every episode ends, everything resets. The next episode begins from a baseline that resembles the baseline before the previous episode began. Catastrophes occur and are absorbed. Revelations are made and forgotten. Characters reach moments of genuine transformation and find themselves by the following week back where they started. This is, as we have noted, a standard feature of episodic television. Long-running shows cannot sustain cumulative consequence, at least not historically, before the prestige television era created a new set of expectations for narrative serialization. The Simpsons predates these expectations, was shaped by different conventions, and has maintained the episodic reset as its fundamental structural principle throughout its run. But to call it simply a convention is to miss something. The reset is the show's most deliberately philosophical choice. It says something specific about how Springfield works, about how memory works, about what change means in a community that has decided not to accumulate consequences. The reset is not simply a production decision. It is a statement. The statement is this: Springfield exists outside the causal chain that normally governs human experience. In ordinary life, consequences persist. What happens in the morning affects what is possible in the afternoon. What happens on one day shapes the conditions of the next. We accumulate not just memories, but the downstream effects of our choices, altered relationships, changed circumstances, doors that close because of what we did in other rooms. This accumulation is what we call a life. It is the shape that time gives to individual existence. Springfield has no shape. It has episodes. Each episode is complete in itself, beginning, middle, end, reset. The next episode begins from a clearing where the previous episode's consequences have been returned to the forest. The characters do not remember what happened last week in any way that influences what they do this week. They are, in this sense, not accumulating lives. They are cycling through an infinite series of present moments, each one vivid and complete, none of them connected to the others in the way that real experience connects. This makes Springfield, philosophically, a Nietzschean nightmare, or paradise, depending on your orientation. Every moment recurs. No moment leaves a permanent mark. The same argument between Homer and Marge recurs in slightly different forms across decades of episodes. The same basic structure of crisis and resolution repeats, episode after episode, without the resolution producing any lasting change. Springfield is a universe of eternal repetition, and its residents are eternally repeating. The coma theory gives this a tragic reading. The repetitions are Homer's brain cycling through the same dream material, unable to generate new content, stuck in a loop of the familiar. The radiation theory gives it a clinical reading. The repetitions are the product of neurological damage that prevents the formation of long-term memory, leaving the population stranded in a perpetual present. The collective denial theory gives it a political reading. The repetitions are chosen rather than compelled, the result of a community that has decided, repeatedly, that the comfort of the familiar is worth the cost of never growing. But there is a fourth reading, one that is neither tragic nor clinical nor political, but something closer to aesthetic. What if the repetition is the point? What if Springfield's episodic structure is not a limitation but an argument? An argument that there is something in the recurring, in the unchanging, that human experience genuinely values and cannot access through ordinary narrative? Every week, Homer makes it home. Every week, the family assembles on the couch. Every week, the opening sequence plays, and the family rushes through their day, and they converge on the living room, and they sit together, and the episode begins. This convergence, this specific act of assembling, of returning to the same place, of finding the family intact, happens every single week with the certainty of a law of nature. Not sometimes, every time. In ordinary life, this certainty does not exist. Families are disrupted. People do not always make it home. The assembly does not always occur. The things we count on to be permanent turn out not to be. This is the specific anxiety of living in time. The knowledge that the convergences are not guaranteed. That the people we expect to find on the couch may not be there. That the recurring moments of our lives could, at any point, be the last rather than another in an infinite series. Springfield removes this anxiety. Springfield guarantees the convergence. Whatever happens in the episode, however far Homer travels, however completely the family is separated, however devastating the events that unfold between the opening sequence and the closing credits, they make it back to the couch. Every time, without fail. The couch gag is a promise renewed every week for 36 years, and the promise has never been broken. This is what the eternal recurrence of Springfield offers that ordinary narrative cannot. The absolute guarantee that nothing will be lost, that the family will be there, that the home will be intact, that the loop will continue. In exchange for this guarantee, Springfield sacrifices growth, consequence, the accumulation of experience that produces change. It sacrifices the future. It sacrifices aging. It sacrifices the ordinary progress of human life. For most viewers, this is not a tragedy. For most viewers, especially the viewers who have been watching since childhood, who grew up with these characters, who have changed significantly while the characters have not. This is the deepest comfort the show provides. They have gotten older. The Simpsons has not. They have lost things. The Simpsons has not. The world has changed around them in ways both wonderful and frightening. The Simpsons has not. Every time they return to Springfield, Springfield is the same. The characters are where they left them. The house is intact. Homer is alive and improbable and eternal. This is why the question of why we cannot let them go, which the show has occasionally turned to examine, directly, and which we have been examining throughout this analysis, has such a simple answer. We cannot let them go because they represent, in their frozen and recurring state, the guarantee we cannot find anywhere else, that some things will always be here when we come back, that some losses are not permanent, that the family is intact and the light is on, and the couch is warm, and we are in time for the opening sequence. The eternal recurrence of Springfield is not Nietzsche's nightmare. It is a childhood bedroom. It is the specific smell of a house you grew up in. It is the knowledge, carried somewhere past the age of reason, that some places stay the same even as you change, and that you can go back to them, and that going back to them is its own kind of nourishment. This is the episodic structure as philosophy, not a limitation, not a convention, but the show's deepest truth, that return is possible, that the home is permanent, that the loop is a gift. Expanded section, Bart Simpson and the Archaeology of Rebellion. Bart Simpson is 10 years old, has been 10 years old for 36 years, and has in that time become one of the most iconic figures in American popular culture. His face appears on merchandise that has been sold on every continent. His catchphrases, phrases generated by a television show in the late 80s and early 90s, have entered the English language with a permanence that their creators could not have anticipated. He is, in the specific way that cartoon characters can be, bigger than the show that contains him. And yet Bart, examined closely, is not the character his cultural image suggests. The cultural image is simpler: the bad boy, the rebel, the underachiever, the kid who does not care. This image was accurate in the show's first season, when Bart was primarily a vehicle for the show's challenge to the family values programming that preceded it, when Bart existed, explicitly, in opposition to the Michael J. Fox, Alex P. Keaton ideal of the responsible, ambitious, appropriately behaved American youth. Bart was the idea the culture had been suppressing, briefly released into animated form. But the show kept going. And as the show kept going, Bart became something more complicated than a rebellion symbol. He became a person. And the person is considerably more interesting than the icon. Consider Bart's relationship with authority. It is not, at the level of the show's best episodes, simple defiance. Bart defies authority. Principal Skinner, Mrs. Krabappel, Homer, the institutions of Springfield that attempt to contain him, but his defiance is not ideological. He is not a principled anarchist. He is not making an argument about the nature of power. He is a 10-year-old boy who finds the expectations of the adult world both arbitrary and suffocating, and who responds to that suffocation by creating enough chaos to breathe. The difference matters. A principled rebel acts from a positive vision of what ought to be. Bart does not have a positive vision. He has an aversion, a physical, instinctive aversion to being told what to do by people whose authority he does not experience as legitimate. His pranks are not political acts. They are acts of self-preservation, the way the body sneezes to expel an irritant. Bart sneezes authority out of his system and experiences temporary relief. The authority returns. He sneezes again. This pattern is the show's most accurate portrait of how powerlessness operates in children, and specifically in boys like Bart. Children whose intelligence and energy and genuine capability are not recognized by the institutions that are supposed to develop them. Bart is not stupid. The show has established in multiple episodes that Bart has real abilities that the school system has either not found or not bothered to look for. He is a skilled skateboarder, which sounds trivial, but skateboarding requires spatial reasoning, physical courage, a willingness to fail and retry, and an ability to read the environment and respond to it dynamically that many adults struggle to demonstrate. He is a capable reader of social situations. He understands people, their motivations, their weaknesses, their specific forms of susceptibility to manipulation, with an accuracy that his academic performance does not suggest. He can, when he commits to something, commit completely. The episodes in which Bart is allowed to commit to something are the show's most affecting portrayals of him. He commits to proving himself to Lisa. He commits to protecting a friend. He commits, in one of the show's most emotionally precise episodes, to making amends for something he has done that genuinely hurt someone. In these moments, the Bart underneath the rebellion is visible. A boy who wants to matter, who wants to be good at something, who wants someone to see what he is actually capable of. He wants this as much as any child wants it. He has simply concluded, based on the available evidence, that the system through which such recognition is usually obtained has decided not to offer it to him. Homer is Bart's most important relationship, and the relationship is a mirror in multiple directions. Homer was Bart's age, with Bart's particular combination of attributes: the energy, the resistance, the intelligence that doesn't perform well in conventional assessments. And Homer's trajectory from that starting point is Bart's most likely destination, not inevitable. The show has been careful to leave Bart's future genuinely open, but the resonance between them, the way Homer occasionally recognizes in Bart something he cannot quite name, the way Bart occasionally looks at Homer and sees something he does not want to become, is one of the show's most structurally important dynamics: the strangling. It is impossible to talk about Homer and Bart without addressing the strangling. Homer strangles Bart. He does this repeatedly, reflexively, as a response to Bart's provocations. It is played as a visual gag, the hands going to the neck, the choking sounds, the cutaway. The show has committed to it as a recurring joke across its entire run. And it is wrong. Not in a way the show does not know. The show knows. There are episodes in which the strangling is acknowledged as harmful, in which Homer's relationship with Bart is examined in ways that take the violence seriously. But mostly the show contains the strangling within its comedy, diffuses it with sound effects and timing, makes it available as a laugh. This is the show's most deliberate ethical compromise, and it is worth sitting with. The choice to make a father strangling his child funny required the show to make a judgment about what its audience could be trusted to receive as play rather than endorsement. The show has generally trusted its audience correctly. Viewers do not take the strangling as a model, do not experience it as an endorsement of violence. The comedy frame works, but the comedy frame also works to prevent the strangling from being seen clearly, which is exactly what the show does with most of Springfield's darker materials. It makes them funny, and the laughter prevents the seeing. The strangling is one of the most obvious instances of this pattern, which the show has used across its run to make visible things it could not show directly, to process things it could not confront directly, to deposit real and difficult content into a comedic vessel that makes it habitable. Bart survives the strangling. He survives everything. He is, in his own way, as indestructible as Homer, not through Homer's inexplicable biological resilience, but through the combination of social skill and creative problem-solving that the show has always known he possesses. Bart finds his way through because finding his way through is what Bart does. The rebellion is not the whole story. The whole story is a 10-year-old boy who refuses to be broken by a world that has repeatedly tried to break him, using every tool available to him, including the ones the adults in his life have tried to take away. He is still on his skateboard. He is still out there, moving through Springfield at the speed of someone who has decided not to wait for the world to offer what it refuses to offer. He will be 10 forever. He will never stop moving. He will never stop finding the next thing to do, the next chaos to generate, the next crack in the system through which the compressed energy of himself can be briefly, gloriously released. This is what Bart is, beneath the icon. Not the bad boy, not the rebel. Just a child who refuses to be small, in a town designed to make everyone small, finding every morning a new way to be as much of himself as Springfield will allow. Expanded section. Springfield and the American Dream. A final accounting, the American Dream is a story. It is the story of a place where anyone, regardless of where they come from, can rise to the limits of their ability and ambition, where the past is not destiny, where the conditions of birth do not determine the conditions of life, where effort is recognized and rewarded, where talent finds its natural level, where the circumstances of the individual are, ultimately, the product of the individual's choices rather than the structures that preceded them. This story has always been partly fiction. The gap between the story and the experience has been the subject of American argument since before the country was formally constituted. But the story has also been partly true, in the specific and limited way that all useful myths are true, not literally, not universally, but in enough cases, and in cases visible enough to sustain the story's power. Dream is a story about what is possible. It has been used frequently to obscure what is probable. But the possible and the probable are not the same thing, and the story's persistence across two and a half centuries of American history suggests that the myth addresses something real about the human desire to believe in the openness of the future. Springfield is the American dream examined at close range over a long time, with more honesty than the story is usually allowed. Homer Simpson should not be where he is. By any rational analysis of his capacities, his IQ, his work record, his history of catastrophic professional failures, he should not have retained his job for 3 decades, should not have a house, should not have the family he has. The American Dream, in its most optimistic reading, says that Homer's position is evidence of the dream's validity. Anyone can achieve a stable life, a good family, a measure of prosperity. Homer has these things. The dream works. Except the show has always known that Homer has these things not because of the dream, but despite it. He has his job because of a deal between his grandfather and his employer. He has his house because Marge made it possible and maintains it through sustained domestic labor. He has his family because Marge decided, repeatedly, to maintain it against the gravity of its tendency to fly apart. Homer has not achieved the American dream. The American dream has been constructed around Homer by the people and forces that needed him to be stable enough to be a reliable employee of a nuclear facility that cannot afford to attract regulatory attention. Burns, who is in one reading the successful expression of the American dream, the entrepreneur who built something, who accumulated wealth through the exercise of his abilities and ambitions, is in another reading its most complete critique. Burns succeeded by externalizing his costs onto the community that surrounds him. The radiation in Springfield's water is Burns's cost of doing business, paid by the residents rather than by Burns himself. The cognitive damage done to Springfield's population is Burns's subsidy from the community, a workforce rendered too impaired to demand better conditions or organize effectively. The regulatory capture that prevents accountability is Burns's investment in the political system, paying dividends in the form of continued impunity. Burns has the American dream precisely because he has arranged for other people to have its costs, without its benefits. This is not what the story says. The story says the dream is available to all. The story does not say that the dream, pursued without constraint, concentrates itself in the hands of a few by stripping the conditions of its availability from everyone else. The story is silent on this. The show has been trying to say it, in the language of comedy and animation, for 36 years. The Simpson family, Homer's family, the family that the show protects above everything, is the dream's human remainder. What is left after the extraction is complete. The modest house on Evergreen Terrace. The nuclear family in the technical sense, living alongside the nuclear facility in the literal sense. The children who are born into a contaminated environment and are navigating it as well as they can with the tools available to them. The father who is cheerful in his reduced state, who has made peace with what is, who found a way to love his life by focusing on what it contains rather than what it has cost. The mother who maintains the form of the dream, the house, the family, the domestic order, through the kind of sustained invisible labor that the dream rarely acknowledges. The Simpsons family is what the American dream looks like when you look at it long enough and honestly enough to see past the aspirational version into the actual one. Not the version of the dream where effort produces advancement, where talent is recognized, where the future is genuinely open. The version where a family makes do, where the house is small but it is theirs, more or less, where the kids are complicated but they are loved, where the problems are real but the people are resilient, where the loop continues because the loop is what the family has to offer itself, and the family has decided it is enough. Is it enough? The show has been asking this question through the structure of its eternal recurrence and its warm domestic frame and its darkly satirical critique of the system that contains the family for 36 years. It has not answered. It cannot answer because the answer requires the show to end, and the show does not end. But if we are forced to answer on the show's behalf, if we have to say what 36 years of Springfield adds up to, the answer is something like this. It is not enough, and it is everything. It is not enough because the family deserves better than Springfield provides. Because the water should be clean, and the school should be funded, and the old should not be abandoned, and the workers should be safe, and the old billionaire should not be immortal. Because the promise the dream makes is real even if the delivery is insufficient. Because Homer should have had his mother, and Marge should have had her art, and Lisa should have had an audience, and Bart should have had a school that saw him, and Maggie should have been allowed to grow up. It is everything because it is what they have. The house on Evergreen Terrace, the family that assembles, the couch that holds them, the television that watches them watching it, the evening that repeats every week with the certainty of a law of nature. Homer home from work, Marge at the counter, the children where they are, the light on. This is the American dream in the key of Springfield. Not triumphant, not defeated, just continuing. Just the family, intact, in the house, in the contaminated town, in the impossible geography, in the floating timeline, in the loop that we built and maintain and cannot quite bring ourselves to break. Still here, still lit, still home. Expanded section. The voice. What it sounds like to narrate Springfield. Before we finish our time here, there is one more thing worth examining. Something meta. Something about the experience of receiving Springfield rather than simply inhabiting it. The experience of listening. The Simpsons is a show built around voice. Not music, though the music matters. Not visuals, though the visual style is instantly recognizable. Voice. The voice cast has been one of the most stable elements of the show's long history. Dan Castellaneta's Homer, Julie Kavner's Marge, Nancy Cartwright's Bart, Yeardley Smith's Lisa, the vast supporting cast maintained by a small group of voice actors across decades of performance. These voices have become the most intimate sonic presences in the lives of many of the show's viewers. More intimate, in some ways, than real voices, because they arrive in the home, through the television, at a frequency and a consistency that no real relationship can match. Homer's voice is the show's primary instrument. Dan Castellaneta found the voice in the show's early episodes. It evolved considerably from the first season, where Homer sounded rougher, less settled, and by season 3, it was the voice that 30 years of viewers have internalized as one of the essential sounds of their television childhoods. The voice does specific things that writing alone cannot accomplish. It makes Homer's stupidity warm rather than cruel, his selfishness funny rather than repellent, his emotional moments genuine rather than manipulative. The vocal performance is, like all great vocal performances in animation, an act of translation, converting a flat character into a living one through the precise management of pitch and timing and what the voice carries underneath the words. Marge's voice is the show's most distinctive instrument. Julie Kavner's husky, slightly strained quality, the voice of someone who is managing more than she is showing, who is keeping something contained, who is communicating support and patience and mild suppressed frustration in every syllable, is a precise vocal portrait of the character. You could not play Marge with a lighter voice. The huskiness is the weight. The quality that sounds like permanent mild effort is the sound of someone maintaining. Lisa's voice, Yeardley Smith's distinctive high clarity, the earnestness that sometimes tips into stridency, captures the character's most essential quality, the refusal to modulate sincerity into social acceptability. Lisa speaks in a voice that does not apologize for caring. It is not always comfortable to hear. It is not meant to be. Smith plays the righteousness with enough warmth that it remains sympathetic, but she does not soften it into likability. Lisa is not trying to be liked. She is trying to be heard. Bart's voice is one of the great achievements of voice casting. Nancy Cartwright is a woman playing a 10-year-old boy, and the performance is so fully inhabited that the gender of the performer has never registered as a barrier to the character's authenticity. The voice has just enough roughness to suggest the edge, just enough brightness to suggest the humor, and underneath both, in the quieter Bart episodes, in the moments of genuine feeling, a softness that the character would deny and the voice cannot hide. These voices are the human element inside the animation. The show can be abstracted into theory, into iceberg diagrams, into cultural analysis, and we have done all of this thoroughly over the course of this descent. But the show's actual experience, the thing that makes people return to it over 36 years, is the experience of hearing these voices. Of turning on the television, or the streaming service, or whatever medium is current when you happen to be watching, and hearing Homer's particular verbal fumble, knowing you are back in Springfield, and the family is there. The voices carry the love. All the theories about radiation and coma dreams and institutional corruption and floating timelines are true about what the show contains. But the voices are what the show sounds like from the inside. And from the inside, Springfield sounds like home. Expanded section. Krusty the Clown. The entertainment industrial complex. There is a character in Springfield who represents something the show has been circling for its entire run, but has never quite confronted directly. The relationship between entertainment and the people who produce it, between the face the public sees and the reality that face conceals, between the comedian and the person the comedian is hiding behind the laughter. Herschel Schmoikel Pinchas Yerukum Kristofsky, Krusty the Clown, is Springfield's most prominent celebrity, a children's entertainer whose television show has been a fixture of Springfield's media landscape for decades. He is also, in his private life, a deeply unhappy person whose relationship with his work is one of the show's most sustained portraits of professional and personal alienation. Krusty smokes. He gambles compulsively. He has had multiple heart attacks. He has faked his own death more than once. His personal hygiene is not the hygiene of the Krusty who appears on television. He is estranged from his father, a rabbi who considers clowning beneath the dignity of the family's religious and intellectual heritage. And this estrangement, which the show has explored in some of its most surprisingly affecting emotional territory, represents the show's most direct engagement with the Jewish immigrant experience in America, the tension between the world the parents built and the world the children find available to them. Krusty's relationship with Bart is one of the show's most interesting asymmetries. Bart loves Krusty, not in the way he loves Milhouse, not as an equal, not as a friend, as a fan, as a true believer. Krusty is the object of Bart's most uncomplicated adulation, which is unusual in a character for whom adulation is generally suspect. When Bart discovers, in an early episode, that Krusty has been framed for a crime he did not commit, and investigates and proves his innocence, the episode reveals something genuine in Bart's character, the capacity for devoted loyalty when the object of devotion has been made vulnerable. Krusty, innocent and disgraced, brings out a Bart who is not rebelling against authority but fighting for it. Fighting for the specific authority of the entertainer who made him feel something, who gave him something to love uncritically, in a life that offers few opportunities for uncritical love. Krusty, for his part, is barely aware that Bart exists. He knows Homer's name only sporadically. He regards his fans with a mixture of professional obligation and genuine bewilderment. These people love an image he has never identified with, a character he performs rather than inhabits. The love his fans feel for Krusty the character is not love he can receive because Krusty the character is not him. He is the man behind the makeup, and the man behind the makeup has never been offered the love the character receives. This dynamic, the performer who cannot receive the love meant for their performance, who exists in a permanent gap between the self that is loved and the self that is actually present, is one of the show's most honest portraits of what celebrity does to the people it touches. The love is real. The object of the love is a fiction. The person who generates the fiction is starving. Krusty's Jewishness is, within the show, one of its most carefully drawn cultural portraits. His father, Rabbi Hyman Kristofsky, voiced, in the show's early seasons, by Jackie Mason, in a performance of specific cultural authenticity that made the father-son episode something the show had not done before, represents a generation and a value system that Herschel rejected in becoming Krusty. The rabbi wanted his son to be serious, to continue the family's tradition of religious and intellectual engagement, to be the kind of Jew that the Krustofsky name implied. The son wanted to make people laugh. The son became famous. The son became rich. The son became unhappy in the specific way that people become unhappy when they have achieved what they wanted, and discovered that the achievement did not produce what they expected from it. The reconciliation between Krusty and his father, which the show affects through one of its characteristically indirect routes. Bart acts as intermediary, as he often does in situations requiring emotional mediation, is played with genuine warmth. The father accepts the son. The son receives the acceptance. The gap briefly closes. And then the show continues, and Krusty continues, and the gap gradually reopens, as gaps do, because closing a gap requires sustained effort and sustained attention, and Krusty's relationship with sustained effort and attention is as complicated as his relationship with everything else. Krusty is the show's portrait of entertainment's specific loneliness. He has spent his career making other people happy. The happiness flows outward, from him to the audience, without a return current. The audience receives it. It does not come back. This is the economy of performance in its most naked form. The performer depletes in one direction, the audience accumulates in the other, and the performer is left with fame and money, and none of the warmth that the audience is carrying home. This is why Krusty's bad decisions, the gambling, the smoking, the faked deaths, the various elaborate self-destructions that the show has chronicled, are not simply character flaws. They are the logical response of a person who spends his professional life giving something he cannot replenish. The vices are the attempt to replenish. They do not work, but they are what is available, and so Krusty reaches for them, over and over, in the specific way that people reach for things that do not fix the problem, but provide enough relief to make the next performance possible. He is still making children laugh. He will be making children laugh forever, or for as long as Springfield has children who watch television, which is to say forever. His ratings have declined. His relevance has diminished. He has been replaced several times over by newer forms of entertainment that Springfield's children find more compelling. And yet he persists. He is still there, in the makeup, under the lights, doing the bit. Not because it gives him what he needs, because it is what he knows. Because the alternative, becoming Herschel Kristofsky again, becoming the rabbi's son rather than the clown's mask, requires a reckoning with who he actually is that is significantly more frightening than another hour on television. The makeup stays on. The show goes on. Krusty goes on. And somewhere in Springfield, Bart watches and believes in the character, and the character cannot receive the belief, and the man behind the character is somewhere in a casino, or a doctor's office, or sitting in a dressing room, looking at the face in the mirror that the makeup will shortly cover, waiting for the performance to start. Expanded section. The show that doesn't know its ending. What 36 years actually means, The Simpsons is still in production. As of 2025, the show has been renewed for additional seasons and shows no immediate signs of concluding. The creative team has indicated, on various occasions, that the show will continue for as long as there is audience for it, and as long as the people involved wish to continue making it. There is no announced finale. There is no planned conclusion. The end, if there is one, is not currently visible. This creates a peculiar situation for analysis. Most long-form narratives can be examined in retrospect, with the complete shape of their arc visible. The Simpsons cannot be examined this way because it is still unfolding. Every analysis, including this one, is provisional. The show may yet do things that recontextualize everything that came before. The writers may yet tell stories that resolve what currently seems unresolvable. The end, when it comes, may make the whole thing legible in a new way. But there is something to be said about what 36 years of continuous production actually represents, even without the perspective that an ending would provide. 36 years is longer than most people's careers. It is longer than most marriages. It is longer than most institutions. It is long enough that the people who were children when the show began are now adults in middle age. Long enough that the cultural context in which the show premiered has shifted so dramatically that the world it originally addressed is in many respects unrecognizable. Long enough that the show has outlasted the specific forms of media in which it began. Network, television, the VHS tape, the DVD box set, and is now distributed through platforms that did not exist when it was created. In this extended sense, The Simpsons is not simply a television show. It is an institution. It has the characteristics of institutions: a founding document, an established procedure, a professional culture, a history that is both celebrated and debated, a set of stakeholders whose relationships with it have changed over time. Like any institution that has persisted across multiple generations, contains multitudes. The original vision, the accommodations made to circumstance, the moments of genuine inspiration, the moments of compromise, the slow accumulation of tradition that makes change increasingly difficult, even when change is clearly needed. The institutional quality of the show is one reason that it generates the intensity of fan response that it does. People do not feel strongly about institutions they are indifferent to. The anger at episodes that betray the show's original spirit, the frustration with the Armin Tamzarian's episode, the disappointment with later seasons' reliance on celebrity cameos over character-driven stories, is the anger of stakeholders whose relationship with the institution is personal. They have invested in it. They have given it years of Sunday evenings. They have let it be present in their households, with their children, as they grew and changed. They have, in the most genuine sense, trusted it. And the moments when it seems to betray that trust feel like institutional betrayal because they are. The people who make the show are also, in many cases, institutional actors in this sense. The writers who have been with the show for decades have built careers around its continuation. The voice actors have given the show's characters their voices for longer than many actors maintain a single role, longer than most actors' entire careers. They are by now inseparable from the characters they play, in the public mind and perhaps in their own. Dan Castellaneta is Homer. Yeardley Smith is Lisa. The separation between person and role that other long-running shows eventually accomplish. The actor who grows visibly older than the character who eventually departs and is replaced has not occurred in The Simpsons because the animation prevents it. The voice can continue indefinitely. The characters do not age. The people who give them voice do. What will the end look like when it comes? The show cannot simply stop between episodes, as if between any two Sundays. An ending will require for something a finale, a conclusion, a final statement about what 36 years of Springfield has been building toward. The show will have to decide, finally, whether the floating timeline stays floating or lands. Whether the Simpson family remains at the ages they have been for 36 years, or whether the final gesture is to let them go, to let Bart turn 11, to let Lisa turn 9, to let Maggie speak, to let Homer and Marge age into the people their years would make them. The fans who have thought about this most carefully tend toward one of two visions. The first is the vision in which the finale lands the timeline, in which time starts working again, in which the characters age and the future that the flash-forward episodes have glimpsed is finally shown to be real and inevitable. Lisa grows up and becomes the person she is meant to become. Bart figures out, finally, how to be at peace with himself. Maggie speaks, and what she says is the resolution of everything. Homer and Marge are old, and they are still together, and the house on Evergreen Terrace is smaller now, because the children are gone, but it is still theirs, and the light is still on. The second vision is the vision in which the finale refuses to land, in which the floating timeline is acknowledged, finally, as a permanent feature of Springfield rather than a narrative device. And the final gesture is to simply let the loop continue, to show the family running in through the front door and landing on the couch one last time, to let the couch gag complete, to let the theme play, to close on the image that has opened every episode for 36 years and let it stand as the conclusion. Both visions are correct about different things. The first is correct that the characters deserve resolution, that the stories the show has been telling have natural conclusions, and that those conclusions are worth telling. The second is correct that resolution might not be what Springfield offers, that the show's most profound truth is the loop rather than the conclusion, that saying goodbye in Springfield is harder than saying hello. What is certain is that when the end comes, it will feel enormous, because the show has been present in so many lives for so long that its ending will function as a kind of collective passage, a shared acknowledgement that something that has been constant is now concluded, that the porch light has been turned off, that we will not be going back to Springfield anymore. That day has not come. Springfield is still there. The show is still running. The loop is still floating. But it is worth, as we ascend from the depths of this analysis, preparing ourselves for that eventual goodbye. Worth considering what it will feel like to have the loop finally land. Worth sitting with the knowledge that the family we have watched for so many years has given us something. Not simply entertainment, not simply comedy, but a recurring proof that somewhere always, the home is intact, the couch is warm, the family is assembled. Until the end, whenever it comes, we have that. We can go back. The door is open, Springfield is waiting. And if you are falling asleep to this, somewhere in the dark, in your room, in your hour, just know that wherever you are, Evergreen Terrace is out there. The light is on. Homer just made it home. The family is together. The couch is warm enough for one more. Good night, Springfield. Expanded section. The background. What Springfield looks like when nobody is watching. One of the most underappreciated aspects of The Simpsons is its visual world. The show's art style has been dismissed, occasionally, as crude or simplistic. The yellow skin, the four fingers, the overbites, the limited range of expressions available to flat-colored faces. This dismissal misses something significant. The visual style of The Simpsons is not crude. It is precise. Every choice is deliberate, and the deliberateness creates a world that is, in its way, more internally consistent than any realistic animation style could have produced. The background art of Springfield is where the world's texture lives. The streets are slightly too wide, the buildings slightly too squat, the perspective slightly distorted in ways that create a space that feels like a recollection of an American town rather than the town itself. Springfield looks like how you remember your hometown rather than how it actually was. The slightly off proportions, the colors that are saturated without quite being garish, the architecture that quotes American vernacular styles without committing to any single region or period. All of this creates a place that feels familiar to everyone and specific to no one. This is deliberate. This is the show's visual philosophy. Springfield should feel like yours. The Simpsons version of Springfield changes subtly across seasons. The early seasons had a rougher quality. The lines were heavier, the colors more subdued, the overall texture slightly grittier. As the show moved into its mid-period, the animation became cleaner, the colors brighter, the world slightly more polished. By the later seasons, the HD upgrade changed the visual register significantly. The image became sharper, the colors more vibrant, the world more detailed. Longtime viewers sometimes find the later visual style disconcerting. The early Springfield had a quality of slight imperfection that matched the show's emotional register. The cleaner HD Springfield feels paradoxically less real. This is a visual version of the tonal shift that fans have noted in the show's writing. The rough-edged early Springfield of seasons 3 through 8 was a place that could contain genuine darkness without contradiction. The cleaner later Springfield is a brighter space, and brightness makes certain things harder to see. The radiation in the water is less visible when everything is very lit. The quiet grief is harder to find when the colors are saturated. The visual shift is not simply technical. It is, whether the show's production team intended it or not, philosophical. What would Springfield look like if it were drawn with complete honesty? If the visual style acknowledged what the show's own narrative has established, the contamination, the poverty, the institutional failure, the damage done to the people who live there? The answer is that it would look like a different kind of show. It would look like something that could not be watched on Sunday nights with the family, that could not perform the function of the weekly gathering around the warm domestic space. It would look like the truth. The show has always known this. The choice to make Springfield bright and yellow and slightly cartoonish is the visual equivalent of the comedy frame. It creates the distance necessary for the darker materials to be received rather than rejected. You can engage with the radiation theory because Springfield looks inviting. You can laugh at Burns because he looks ridiculous. You can feel the sadness of Grandpa's situation because the visual warmth of the show makes the contrast legible rather than overwhelming. The art style is not separate from the content. It is part of how the content is delivered. This is, in the end, what all great animation achieves: the use of unrealistic visual form to make emotional truth more accessible than realism would allow. We can see Homer's love for Marge more clearly in a drawing than we could in a live-action performance, because the simplification removes the clutter of physical reality and leaves only what matters. We can see Springfield's damage more clearly in this slightly distorted, yellow-lit world than we could in a naturalistic reproduction, because the distortion is itself a form of honesty about the way Springfield's reality deviates from what reality is supposed to look like. Springfield looks the way it looks because it is the way it is. Bright because it needs to be bearable. Slightly wrong because it is slightly wrong. Yellow because the show decided very early to make the strangeness visible rather than hidden. And warm, always lit, always giving off the particular quality of light that makes you want to stay, because the show has always understood that the function of Springfield is not to disturb you into action but to hold you while you breathe. Expanded section. The music of Springfield. Alf Clausen and the Sound of the Loop. Every television show has a sonic identity. The Simpsons' sonic identity is one of the most immediately recognizable in the history of the medium. The theme, written by Danny Elfman, who composed it in under a day, reportedly in his particular key of orchestral whimsy, is 50 seconds of television music that has been heard, more times than almost any piece of music in history. It plays at the beginning of every episode, in slightly varying forms, as the family rushes through their day and converges on the couch. It is the show's most fundamental recurring element, but the underscore, the music that runs beneath the episodes themselves, is the work of Alf Clausen, who served as the show's composer from season 2 through season 28, when he was replaced by the Dutch composer Bleeding Fingers Music. Clausen's contribution to the show's emotional architecture is difficult to overstate. He wrote, over the course of his tenure, an extraordinary amount of music, original orchestral underscore, pastiche compositions in dozens of different styles, musical parody sequences, and the show's many elaborate musical numbers, of which there were more than any other animated show in history. What Clausen brought to the show was a musical sophistication that matched the show's writing sophistication. The underscore in The Simpsons' best episodes functions the way great film music functions. It tells you how to feel about what you are seeing without stating it directly. It provides emotional cues that amplify what the image and dialogue are doing. And it occasionally does something more. It carries emotional content that the surface of the scene is not showing. The quieter Homer scenes, the ones in which something genuinely sad is present beneath the comedy, are often the ones where Clausen's underscore is doing the most delicate and precise work. A single melodic phrase, held and released, that signals to the listening body that what is happening matters. The show's musical numbers are a category of their own. The Simpsons has produced dozens of original songs across its run. Songs that parody Broadway, pop music, country, folk, jazz, rock, and every other genre the writers could find use for. Some of these songs, We Do, the Stonecutters song, Monorail, See My Vest, We're Sending Our Love Down the Well, have become as culturally embedded as the show's visual and verbal humor. They are sung at karaoke. They are quoted in conversation. They are treated as an informal canon of American comedy music that exists independent of the show that produced them. The musical identity of Springfield is inseparable from the emotional identity of Springfield. The show sounds warm because the music is warm. The orchestral writing has a fullness and a humanity that synthetic underscore could not provide. The show sounds funny because the music is funny. The parodies and pastiche compositions are executed with genuine musical intelligence rather than approximation. The show sounds, occasionally, genuinely sad because the music knows how to be genuinely sad without the comedy frame to protect it. Clausen's departure from the show was not voluntary. He was replaced as part of a cost-saving decision by Fox, which chose to use a smaller, non-union music production company rather than continue with the full orchestra that Clausen had been using. The change was audible. Fans and critics noted the difference in the show's sound. A slightly thinner quality, a slightly more processed texture, the particular warmth of a live orchestra replaced by something more efficient. The loss of that orchestral warmth is, in the context of everything we have been discussing, meaningful. The orchestra was part of how Springfield felt real. Instruments played by people in a room together produced something that digital reproduction, however technically superior, cannot fully replicate. The physical presence of human beings making sound together. The Simpsons, under Clausen, had this quality. It sounded like people. It sounded human. It sounded like Springfield. The music, like everything else in Springfield, changed. Unlike everything else in Springfield, the change was not reset. It remained. The warmth of the early seasons includes a specific quality that is partly visual, partly written, and partly the sound of Alf Clausen's orchestra playing something that was made to hold a town. Expanded section. The final inventory, every mystery, every thread, every light left on Let Us Take Inventory. Not of the theories, we have examined those, but of the things the show has left unresolved, the threads it pulled and then declined to follow, the questions it asked and then declined to answer. Not as a complaint, as an acknowledgement. The unresolved is part of what Springfield is. The question of Maggie's endgame. The show has never told us what Maggie intends to do with what she knows. It has shown us that she is extraordinary. It has shown us that she is watchful. It has shown us that she acts with precision when she acts at all. But the final act, the moment, if it ever comes, when Maggie's long silence ends, the show has not shown us. It may never show us. Maggie's silence may be the show's final, permanent mystery, the thing it holds back, the last piece of information that would change everything, the card it keeps in its hand across 36 years of play. The question of Homer's true intelligence. The crayon is back. The IQ is where it was. The Homer who existed briefly without the crayon, the articulate, clear-eyed, capable Homer, is dormant. But dormant is not gone. The capacity is in there. And the question of what Homer might have done with his life, who he might have been, what he might have seen clearly if the crayon had never been there or had been removed and left removed. This question the show has raised and declined to answer. Homer's potential is perhaps the most poignant of Springfield's unresolved mysteries, because it is the most ordinary one, the potential that is suppressed or damaged or never fully realized. This is not a cartoon mystery. This is a human one, the question of Springfield's location. Matt Groening said Oregon. The show kept contradicting him. The location remains unfixed. Springfield is everywhere. Springfield is yours. This is the correct answer, the answer the show has maintained against every attempt to pin it down. But the feeling of wanting to find it, to plant a flag, to say this is where it is, this feeling does not go away. It is the feeling of wanting to visit a place that exists only in the imagination, and finding that the imagination is too precise to be satisfied with the answer that it is only in the imagination. The question of whether the coma theory is true. Aljan said no. The show itself, in season 34, simultaneously depicted the theory as real and denied it. The evidence for it, built up across years of structural observation, does not go away because the showrunner said it isn't true. The evidence is in the show. The denial is outside the show. These are not equivalent. The coma theory remains, as it has always been, the most internally consistent explanation for the show's structural properties. Whether it is true in the sense that the writers intended, it is a different question from whether it is true in the sense that it accurately describes what the show has become. The question of who really shot Burns. The official answer is Maggie. Homer's season 18 confession is unexplained. The sundial clue was explicitly described as a coincidence by Burns. The alternate endings were fully produced. The Mysteries was designed as a contest that essentially nobody won. The official answer is Maggie. The case was never really closed. In Springfield, as we noted, these are two very different things. The question of what Mona Simpson's activism was really about. The show told us she targeted Burns's biological weapons lab. It did not tell us how she became radicalized, what else she did during her years underground, what the full scope of her activity was, what she was trying to build, beyond the destruction of the specific weapons she destroyed. She is a revolutionary figure of whom we have only fragments. The fragments suggest something larger. The larger thing has never been shown. The question of what Springfield was before Burns. The town exists. It has history. It had life before the power plant. What was that life? Who were the people who built it, before the radiation began, before the economy became organized around a single employer's interests? The show has occasionally glimpsed this pre-Burns Springfield. In flashbacks, in the founding mythology, in the rare episodes that gesture toward the town's historical existence. But the full picture has never been assembled. Springfield before Burns is a missing document. The question of Santa's little helper's inner life. The Simpson family dog is a greyhound, rescued from the racing circuit, who has been part of the family for the show's entire run. He has, in several episodes, been granted a form of interiority, episodes that briefly follow his perspective, that show us something of what the world looks like from the dog's eye view. What has he seen? What does he know? A creature with 4 functional legs in Springfield, capable of genuine sensory experience, exposed to the same radiation and the same impossible events, possessing a form of consciousness that is different from, but not inferior to, the consciousness of Springfield's human residents. Santa's little helper is, in the deep theory of Springfield, a witness whose testimony has never been taken. None of these mysteries will be resolved here. They may not be resolved in the show. The show is still running. The inventory is still open. The threads are still loose. This is appropriate. Springfield is a place that generates mysteries faster than it resolves them. It always has been. The accumulation of unresolved threads is part of what makes Springfield the specific world it is. A world that rewards sustained attention by always having something more, something further, something you have not quite seen yet, if you look at the right angle in the right light. The light in Springfield is always slightly warm. The angle is always slightly off, and there is always something more. There always will be. That is the final inventory. That is what we carry back from the descent. Not answers. Springfield has very few of those, but threads, lights, the knowledge of what is down there, in the water, in the dark, in the quiet space, behind the comedy and the warmth and the couch gag. Springfield is still there, and so are we. Good night. One last thing, before the credits roll on this particular descent. The show has always known that it was building something larger than entertainment. The writers who staffed its rooms across its decades knew this. The audience who returned every Sunday night knew it, without necessarily having the vocabulary for it. The cultural critics who took it seriously knew it. The fans who built the theories knew it most of all. What was built is not simply a catalog of episodes. It is a habitable world. A place with its own internal laws, its own community, its own history of small decisions that accumulated into something nobody planned. Springfield did not arrive complete. It was made, piece by piece, episode by episode, season by season, across decades of writers and performers and animators and musicians who were, in their separate ways, maintaining a shared space. A space the audience could return to. A space that would hold them. The greatest achievement of The Simpsons is not any single episode, any single joke, any single season, any single theory. The greatest achievement is that the space is still there. After 36 years, after every challenge to its relevance, and every critique of its declining quality, and every moment when the culture seemed to have moved on, the space is still there. You can still through to Springfield. The porch light is on. The family is home. The couch is warm. What more does a home need to be? There is a version of this analysis that could continue for another 36 years. Because Springfield is that kind of world. Because the show keeps running, keeps producing new material, keeps adding new threads to an already dense tapestry that rewards closer and closer examination. Because the audience keeps watching and thinking, and building theories in the dark, and coming back to the show with fresh eyes and finding something they had not noticed before. This is what the best long-form storytelling does. It creates the conditions for perpetual discovery, not because it is hiding things deliberately, not entirely, but because a world built with enough care and enough internal consistency will always contain more than any single examination can exhaust. Springfield is inexhaustible, not because it is infinite, but because it has been made with enough love and enough intelligence that it rewards the attention you bring to it, without ever quite finishing with. Bring more attention. Come back. The town is still there. Now finally rest. If you have been awake for all of this, if the theories and the histories and the mysteries have kept you company through whatever hour you are in, right now, then you have spent real time in Springfield. Real time in the way that matters. Not clock time, but the kind of time that becomes part of you, that joins the archive of things you have carried through the world, that shaped how you see it. You carry Springfield now. Whatever you already carried of it, you carry more. The radiation theory, the coma theory, Maggie watching from the corner, Burns maintained by weekly treatments in a facility that glows in the dark, Homer with the crayon and without it, Marge at the counter, Bart on the skateboard, Lisa with the saxophone, playing into a room that is not quite ready to hear it yet. You carry all of it. And somewhere, in the amber of the floating timeline, the family carries you. Sleep well, wherever you are, in whatever time you are reading this. Springfield endures. The loop floats. The porch light never goes out. Good night.